And welcome to this evening's study session. Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes 3 study session items. Seeing there are no concept reviews on the agenda this evening, there won't be any public comment. You can watch the study session live on Channel 8 and through video streaming at broomfield.org/council meetings. For our hard of hearing residents present, we have wireless headsets available at the back of the council chambers through our AV team. Our first item this evening provides an update regarding Broomfield's long-range financial plan. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council and community. While the amount of folks in the audience don't represent the thrilling nature with which we are prepared to present this. This is a culmination of about 4 years of work. The mayor's been on this journey with us. The folks that are listed as contributors are representing their teams. There was probably around 75 folks that participate in this long-range financial plan. And it's about having a repeatable process. So what this leadership team has experienced post-COVID is a tremendous amount of discovery, research, and exploration, and ensuring that the findings are identifiable and able to be looked at and reviewed frequently. In the past, the long-range financial plan has been a snapshot every 5 years. As we know, our world looks completely different than it did 5 years ago. Our community looks completely different than it does 5 years ago. Quite frankly, we all look very different than we did a year ago. So having a repeatable process that sets Broomfield up for the future. And that means that we have to have a repeatable process that more individuals that are on staff long after any one of our departures are still able to understand how the information is digested, where it's collected, what it means, and how we process it. Thus, the 4-year journey. Everyone loves transparency until you're on the receiving end of transparency. This tool doesn't soften, nor does it smooth. That's not what this repeatable process looks like. This repeatable data-driven process allows council to make decisions that are cumulative in nature. So every Tuesday when you're on this dais and we're making decisions, particularly land use decisions, that impacts us short-term, medium-term, and long-term. What we've been able to include, that Mr. Romine will go through in just a moment, is that it's a multifaceted approach. In the past, we've only looked at land use or permits, or water or resources or prior business development agreements. This tool allows us the opportunity to move through each one of those components with curiosity rather than judgment. The reason that's important is because it shouldn't be a staff filter when we're looking at the outcomes of the various decisions. It has to be models that we're all in agreement on the front end. So if you look at this slide, I'm going to do the first 3. So the evolution of the long-range financial plan. For the 2026, it seems that simplicity, what you all will be seeing tonight, is the framework. We're coming back in July when we're able to, we have the model up and running, but it's not detailed. And by detailed, I don't mean detailed elements. I mean that it doesn't look pretty yet. So we are using this tool to make decisions right now, to get into the practice of what it looks like to have each one of these representatives that are sitting here in front of you get in the mindset of what their data means and how it interacts and how it competes against other data. So we're also looking at year by year for 5 years, and then 5 years out to 10 years, and then going to 2055. We don't want to be making decisions, sole decisions, based on what we think is going to happen in 2025. That said, the immediate decisions will be categorized into short-term, medium-term, and long-term, so that council is able to have a risk management tool to be able to say, if we make this decision now, to what degree do we have flexibility to make this decision, knowing that we have a whole host of variables that are standing behind us. Jeff's going to get into it in a minute, but we do break down the land use granularity, which is 8 different types. So we know right now that there are 5 types of commercial development. There are 3 types of residential development. The reason that granular approach is important is because each one has different levels of costs. Each one has varying degrees of revenue. So as we talk about the disparities between costs continue to increase, revenues flatten, but our delta between those two continues to grow, and it will continue to grow. So the diversification of revenue means several different things. Oftentimes it means the first approach is increasing taxes. You can't base our future on tax revenue coming from new taxes increasing, because we haven't realized that yet. So it's staff's position for council to understand the realities of where we are right now, what those decisions will look like moving forward, and what hasn't necessarily been communicated clearly because we haven't had a repeatable process is that cumulative effect. So when council makes any project-based decisions, and not just development projects, but any initiatives, we have to be able to say, how does that interchange the balance of what it is that we're working on now while we're trying to contain costs? That comes back to service level. How do we maintain existing service levels when we know costs are increasing and revenue isn't? That's part of the conversation that we'll have tonight. Next slide, please. These folks that are sitting here are representative of what this looks like. In the past, it's been really the architects of our financial future have been a handful of folks that have deep institutional knowledge. When that deep institutional knowledge goes, we can't have the knowledge and the basis for decision-making go with them. It's not only a repeatable process, but it's a multi-pronged approach. It's how our culture in Broomfield works. Everyone is at the table. It's not linear. So when we have infusions, we understand that it allows for that varying levels of expertise. We're not talking about department heads. We're not talking about just line staff. We're talking about a very diverse set of individuals that bring skill sets that have the mindset of now, medium term, and future planning, because they're all very different mindsets. I'm going to hand it over to Jeff.
Next slide, please. So as Manager Hoffman, Mayor Pro Tem, council members, I'm Jeff Romine. I'm an economist with the City and County of Broomfield, and I've had the pleasure of leading this team. And the unique part of this is other duties as assigned team. Everybody's got a day job, and you see them all here and many others. Everybody has a day job, but we also had work on this. And this was really a fun project. As Manager Hoffman pointed out, it's been going on for 4 or 5 years. Not so much from the standpoint of the work side, but trying to figure out what it is we want to do. So the questions that were asked in focus sessions, in council study sessions, at council meetings, we've been paying attention, and that's what we've incorporated into this model. I can tell you, Manager Hoffman has been, as well as Dan and Anna too, have been inundated with simple questions for the last month or two as I've been trying to get it exactly the way we want. And I don't mean from a structural kind of math perspective, but from a policy perspective. What kind of questions do we want to answer? And so as an example, one of them was just a week or so ago, how do we think about compensation for employees and how do we forecast that going forward? Well, we want to break what the raise might be versus what the benefit cost would be, so that we're really getting into that level of detail, and I'll talk more about it. But this is the first slide that kind of leads and reminds you all of where we were, and that is the tool that we had before was great. It was appropriate for the time we were at, but as you can tell, as we've been moving through the cycle of the community and moving through the cycle of the economy, tools have to evolve. And those, in order to answer the questions that are before the city council and as you're making those policy decisions. So next slide, please. So the next 15 slides or so are going to go into this, and we'll be talking about how it all fits together. You're not going to see a lot of math equations. This will be the closest I'm going to get to. And that is if you take those boxes, you get A plus B equals C. That's the math that I'm going to talk about. But really, we start with the land use decisions the council is making. That is the way that that you all actually affect what we're going to be like in the future. There are lots of what I call exogenous variables and other things. There's variables coming in from the globe and everything else, and they're happening every day. Those we bring into the model, those we bring into the finance and economics, but really where you all are is oftentimes in a land use decision. And that's something that is controllable and is understandable by council, and you are making those decisions. So this is really what we're trying to inform. So we bring these things together. We start with land use. We think about what it might look like based upon the comp plan and based upon what you all have been suggesting and talking about. We bring that forward, and that creates the financial outlook. So that's one of the decision factors. I want to remind you right now, and you'll hear me say it probably several times, and as we talk about it going forward, this is not a budget model. This is not a financial model. This is really a decision support tool. You're going to hear me use the terms which I've been using. You've heard me say it many times before. It's about useful information. Many of my peers can provide all kinds of data that's not very useful to decisions, but we love to stand on them. We'll talk about esoteric numbers and things like that. The whole point of this tool and the whole point of almost everything I try to bring to council through memos or other things is to provide useful information. And that's what this tool is really about. Next slide, please. One of the most complex parts of it that we're not very transparent about, that we're increasing the transparency through this model, is the cumulative effect of decisions that are made, development agreements, revenue sharing structures, the land use, and how those fit together. We oftentimes think of them as one-offs, perhaps with the development. We're bringing those into the model because they actually are part of when we bring the financials forward. We do think about them, but oftentimes it's not out of control. It's not something that is exogenous to this model. It's something that should be part and parcel. So and this is the other part of it, and I just want to kind of reference this, and that is each of these decisions that you're making and that are made for this community, because we've become this community that has been developing over the last 30 years or more, but really over the last 30 years substantially, what's left to choose about is smaller and smaller. And so therefore, the ability of those choices are going to have a more pronounced impact. We don't have the space to be able to say, maybe we got this one right, or maybe we got this one wrong, because you just don't have that much left to do from the standpoint of land use. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about redevelopment. That's a similar decision, but it is becoming a more finite set. It's oftentimes referred to in different ways. The example I would use is recently council considered the concept reviews related to development along Colorado 7. The model, the 2004 model, the 11, then even into getting in closer to 19, it was proposing and showing a land use that was for another mall up there at Colorado 7 and I-25. It was proposed. We started working on it. It was a visionary thing. So we're talking 1.5 million to 2 million square feet of retail. Stripping that out changes the reality, because that's not what's going to happen up there. There's not another mall that's probably going to be built in Denver, in the Denver metro area. So what we saw, and what many of you know, is it's evolved from a mall into a retail-led mixed use, into a very community-oriented mixed use, and Baseline will say that has a mix. And now we're seeing with the two hospital proposals that came before you, those are not being led by retail anymore. Now they're being led by community amenities, which creates a whole different fiscal outcome. And so I use that as an example to say, over the last 20 years, these are all real projects and real developments, but they've evolved. And the model, the land use all needs to evolve with it. And so that's what we've been doing. Next slide, please. As Manager Hoffman talked about, there are 8 different land use types. There's over 300 geographies. There's 10 different market variables that I'm going to talk about later. But I wanted to spend just a brief moment. Manager Hoffman talked about the 3 different housing and 5 different commercial. You'll see this in different places. You'll see it later on, but they are single family, mid-density multifamily, and apartments, high-density multifamily, which would also include condo. On the other side, we have what we call office and innovation space, production space, which is more manufacturing, retail and restaurants, the hospitality sector, miscellaneous offer, which produces a different thing, and then, of course, government, nonprofit, and churches, which consume land, are commercial development, but don't produce much revenue, as you can imagine, but do contribute to the cost side. The real key when we were developing these about a year ago, as a small team that was working on that element of it, was what types of revenue are they producing? So as you can imagine, office produces a little bit more property tax, not much sales tax. Retail on the other side is primarily sales tax oriented. We also asked, when we worked on this, our department heads to think about who they're serving between those various client groups. And so that's really what that breakdown is about, is linking it to both the service costs, program costs, as well as the revenue costs. Next slide, please. This slide, really, the key thing is the times are different. We do expect the volatility to change. And so they're led, and that volatility is incurred through a number of different ways, and you hear me talk about it later. You know this very intimately in many cases, and that is property taxes, which used to be, you could just count on it. It didn't change. We saw it, and it was always going to be this upswing in revenue. Obviously, the state legislature changed that equation for us. There are other things that are changing it. We all used to, for the last 30 or 40 years, go to the place of work. We spent generally most of our days, our work days, at a place of work. In today's era, we don't. An awful lot of people are spending 2 days, 3 days at work, sometimes not going in at all except for special meetings. And so how we work is changing the variability, the stability of the property tax on the commercial side. So what we wanted to do is make sure this model could react quickly, and we could update it quickly to talk about those types of revenue impacts coming from the economy, coming from consumer behavior. And so really that's what's going on. The second part is, I would tell you, is I've already mentioned that we have a smaller amount of land that can be developed for different purposes, different activities. I would tell you this, my experience both in my former position and here is now that we're in this place where there's very little land, guess what? The land that's not developed is the hardest to develop. It's the most expensive. The infrastructure costs, the soils, whatever it may be, they become more difficult. And if you think that's true just on the greenfield side of land, think about the redevelopment, what it takes to take a Flatirons Marketplace, what used to be, a big retail center, the big box centers, they used to refer to them, and take that and switch that completely over. So you can imagine when you might have 300,000 square feet of retail, how much the water pipes, Ken is here, so how much of the water pipes, the sewer pipes that it takes for people that are there for, a few hours, occasionally, that type of thing, but we really don't see that concentration, and turn it into, we'll say, at some point, 1,500 apartments. And what is that going to do to the system? So the redevelopment, whether it's densification in first and second filing, whether it's a redevelopment, all of those things change the utility infrastructure that would have to be put in place. So we're trying to capture a little bit of that at the same time. Next slide, please. The whole goal here is we talk about the long-term fiscal implications. You will hear, and you have heard it time and time again as you've listened to developers that have proposed things through concept reviews or SDPs. They will oftentimes talk to you about the transactional outcomes. Isn't this going to be great? You're going to get use tax and, oh my gosh, we're going to see all this building and all these construction jobs. And I will tell you, and the mayor knows this from some of the conversations she and I've had with different developers and others over the years. Honestly, I don't really care that much about what's going to happen next year. My job is to help you keep track of what's going to happen in 20 years. Why? Because we don't get to build it again in 20 years. We're going to live with it. This community lives with it. So understanding both the transactional outcomes, but more importantly, is the value outcomes. How does it contribute to the outcomes financially, community, and everything else? And that is really something that this model is really intended to do. Manager Hoffman already talked about the 1 years. We're trying to capture that because there's a little bit known about the next 5 years, but we also want to make sure we're paying attention to what's happening in 20, or in the case of Graham and Ken, 30 years out, because when you're talking about the enterprise funds, which aren't part of this model, but do rely on the land use side of it and the population sides of it, we're talking 30 years that we should be thinking about. And the questions are coming to you about the 30 years. When should we build infrastructure? How much tanks capacity and things like that? When Graham's looking at it, he's financing, whether it be on the general fund side or the enterprise fund side, 25-year bonds. We really need to understand the financial outcomes. Next slide, please. So as we look forward, it's really important. This is a policy responsive model. This is not static. We're trying to improve the information. We want it to quickly evolve. And that doesn't mean every day, but we do update it, and we plan to update some of it quarterly and others annually, and allow us to focus on the choices of the outcomes as opposed to, what is the interest rate going to be 3% or 3.5%? We can model it and try it both ways and see what the outcomes are. So we can test those kind of market factors so that we're really staying focused on the policy outcomes. Next slide, please. As many of you know, and as you recalled from Lynn Merwin's presentation just a few weeks ago, we have engaged and we're started on what we're calling the comprehensive plan, and it's also the TMP plan. So it's the transportation management plan also at the same time. So it's called Broomfield Together. Honestly, as Lynn and Mark and Sarah were going through the selection, and I was fortunate to sit on that team, the selection of the consultants who are going to work on it, they asked questions about the long-range financial plan. They asked questions about it. And I listened, and we evolved the model a little bit more. So we added some efficiencies into the model to say, just because, so the static models that we used to have would say, if you add another 100,000 square feet, and let's say we had 1 million, you just add 10% more. No, if we add 100,000 square feet, there's some efficiencies to be gained. And at 1.1 million, you don't need exactly the same amount of, we'll call it, economist staff for simplicity's sake. There's only one of me, so I divide up differently. But the key is the efficiencies are different for different departments. So what I refer to as the front-facing departments, police, library, parks, they tend to be more correlated with a static relationship. But other departments, there's an efficiency to be gained. So we've added that into the model so that we can see some of that efficiency gains coming through. It's a variable that we can adjust if we think that we're going a little too far, but it's really aimed at that, which is add another 100 households. It doesn't necessarily increase the cost by 100 households. It's a little bit less. Next slide, please. The key here is the last box. All of this, the PUDs, the information from the long-range financial plan, as you are going through those decisions and as we talk about them and bring them forward on the next project, it's about helping you. So the important part of this is the long-range financial plan is not a gatekeeper. It is not a yes/no tool. It is an information tool. And many of you have seen it time and time again in the section where it says economic and financial outcomes or impacts. It is there for your information. It provides you, but you all have a greater span of information. So you're going to make choices. Oh, maybe it does cost us a little bit more, but we get this kind of outcome for the community. That is not, the model can't do that. The model can give you the information, allow you to have that, and then for you to put that in your calculations as you make decisions. So the key on this slide really is, it is about helping you, providing information for policy judgment calls. Next slide, please. This is, I would sum up this slide with the title line, quite frankly. The outlook can change, but the long-range financial plan is built to test what is the real change? What are we really affecting? You don't, council, me, I might have I might believe what I think is going to happen tomorrow, today and tomorrow at the Federal Reserve Bank Policy Committee on whether overnight rates are going to go up or down. Doesn't matter. What matters is let's take that. You can see it's one of the boxes, economic, state, and federal and global shocks and other effects. Those types of things we can bring in. We are put them in specifically into the model so we can see them and see how they might affect things. But the real key is the land use mix. That's been changing right now, as you all know. We're seeing an awful lot of proposals in a particular direction. The policy set that's coming from state legislators, the federal government, as well as what the city council may choose to do going forward is around tax and revenue policy. The newest one is really the regional competition and consumer shifts. We've seen it. So remote shopping, how do we handle that? How do we attribute that? What do we think about? So we've definitely brought that in. The aging infrastructure has been a focus of this council for the last 2 or 3 years. It will continue to be. That is not something that's ever going to go away now. And we've explicitly broken that out so we can understand what's asset recovery and replacement looks like. And then, of course, you can imagine what's happening with the other. Next slide, please. The long-term revenue performance becomes more dependent on economic strength than on land expansion. If you recall that weave model, that weave slide at the very beginning, we built this community. The community's been built on the back and with great decisions made in the past on growth. So if we needed more revenue, yes, we saw revenue enhancements occurring through our existing businesses or through our existing property, but at the same time, it was new growth that was overcoming any variance. So as we've said many times, some costs rise faster than others. So we will expect to see property tax stay somewhat stable, grow slightly. We'll see sales tax grow in a particular manner. Those are forecastable. We can understand those. At the same time, labor costs, government costs, construction costs grow faster than those. So we're always historically able to overcome those primarily through the growth that was occurring within the community. So it's almost like we're paying for it today. Maybe we'll get the benefits tomorrow, but that's kind of the model that it was. We recognize going forward from now on, it really is going to be the economic strength and how we are growing the assets, the revenue producing assets going forward. How do our shopping centers do better? How do our stores do better? So the city council made this decision roughly 2.5, 3 years ago and made a very Herculean investment in Macerich to redevelop the Flatirons Crossing Mall. We had already seen sales tax starting to erode from that mall. It is a significant revenue source for the city and county of Broomfield. It is the primary source of our sales and use tax. It's not 50%, but it's a very significant one. And as we're seeing that go down, the decision was the city was going to reinvest to ensure that revenue stream and that activity continued. That is the type of thing we're talking about. How do we do this better with what we have? How do we reinvest and make wise public financial decisions? Some cases, they are investing in the private sector to do what we want them to do. In other cases, it's making investments within our own capital stock, whether it be roads, water treatment plants, even our staff. Those are the capital assets we're talking about. And how do we make those choices? That's what the model is intended to do. It becomes less automatic and it's more sensitive to external changes. If there was one slide I think we're ever going to refer back to, it's going to be this slide, honestly, because it just kind of captures the entire point of this. Next slide, please. As you can tell, there are drivers to costs. I've talked a little bit about revenue, but I just want to talk about costs. So service expectation, Manager Hoffman often talks about the level of service that we always like to provide the residents here, something the council has made the decision based upon the direction the community has given you. So that second bullet, service expectations in a built community, that is a cost driver. It just is going to continue to be. On the other side, some of those governmental costs are obviously labor market and compensation pressures and the inflation on governmental goods and construction materials. Those are things that are a little outside our control at some points, but other times we do have some control over it. So we're modeling those, being able to see what those look like. Those become part of it is a policy decision. So it's just quite frankly, the cost pressures are just going to continue and the revenue will not keep up. So we've got to figure out how to enhance the revenue to keep up while also managing costs. I told you this is not a budget tool, but it helps Graham and his team and David and Stephanie and others figure out where those pressures are so that they can figure out how to budget at the same time. So it's a useful input tool for their work. Next slide. I only have 3 left, Mayor. And that is I wanted to take a brief moment to talk about revenues because we oftentimes skip it over. You know, I will talk about them forever if you get me in a room and you give me the time. But sales tax is the most volatile of our revenue sources. It's volatile because it's both uniquely connected to the economy, but it's also connected to where we are in the stage of development in this community. So where we see sales tax going and how we see it evolving. I already mentioned the fact that we're seeing an increased amount of online sales. I just was looking at the ICSC report for the holiday season, and depending on generation, there's a different level of how those generations interact in their shopping behavior this year, based upon surveys from retailers. And so you really see this engagement. Some are buying only from an online buyer or online store. Others are shopping online and then going and making the hard purchase, the physical purchase in a store. So we can see how that differentiates across generation. Secondly is property tax. I've already mentioned that that the policy drivers now are really, and always have been, the state of Colorado. They set the assessment rates and they are setting other elements of it. And so we can evolve, but the market is changing at the exact same time. So we have both, as we've talked about before, the $6.5 million impact on our property tax. Both came from state direction. I'll be kind and call it direction. And then the other side, of course, is a changing in the commercial real estate side. And how the values of those, and that both of those are still continuing. Now, the state legislature, at least as I know, is not planning anything this year, but that doesn't mean next year or the year after, I don't know. But I do know that right now we're seeing still stress on the commercial real estate market. And so that's where that is coming. The third one I would just point out, which is also use in tax, that's obviously linked to the market. And as many of you know, the real estate market has slowed down and in some cases actually even stopped. You're not seeing new multifamily moving forward. We're not seeing, obviously, office building moving forward. So we have to pay attention to that, and we bring that in through the land use modeling that we're doing and thinking about that in the data, and then also how it comes into the financial modeling. The others are somewhat self-explanatory. I don't want to go through all of them tonight, but there will be documentation about the model that will come when we bring the full, the prettier model, if you will, the one that's a little bit cleaner to look at. That we'll be bringing that forward in July, but we do have the working model now. Other than perhaps 1 or 2 of you, I don't think you'd want to see it. It is effectively, I've actually cut it down from 25 worksheets down to 7 because I was just going nuts with the 25 that we used to have. But even in that one, I think Byron, it's probably about, we'll call it 75 columns and probably about 100 rows. And those all have numbers in them, but within those is the calculations. And so they're all calculations, and it's matrix math. That's all I'm going to say. The next slide, please. I mentioned that we have 10 different factors that are affecting it. We used to really only have arguably 2, maybe 3, you could say. We always had inflation in it. We did have a cost, governmental program and service cost. That was in the old model also, the former model. And the residential commercial, we had those growing up at the same amount. So basically it was property taxes are going to grow by 3.5%. They're going to grow by 3.5%. It was an historic factor and we put it in. Now you can see that they're much more market reflective, both on the expenditure side and the cost side. I can tell you, and Brandon and Maddie and Byron were on the call with me. At one point, I was talking with some of the people helping us of possibly having up to 25 variables. And then better part of Valor said, let's get to 10. That seems like enough of a variable set. So we have those in the model. Next line. or next slide, sorry, please. These are the expenses. Now, within those expenses, there are many details, and so we didn't give you the full list. But these are the operating expenses. We actually break all the departments into those operating expense side. On the capital side, the public investment side, I use capital because of my training. But the public investment, we are doing that through a number of ways. We do it through debt payment. Obviously, because we take out a bond or we take out a COP or something like that. And so there's debt payment. We do it through CIP. And as you can see, we've broken the CIP now into three groups, three buckets, if you will. And then finally, the development and business agreements. Because those are related to the development, they're causing it. I use the example of Macerich and Flatirons, the Flatirons area with Hi-Fi. We have a development agreement in place. We are providing them support for the work that they're doing, and it goes for roughly a 15-year period, but it's based upon certain milestones being achieved, and then we release certain amounts of funds. So it's a very focused document because of the way we developed it. So these aren't open-ended agreements any longer. They are very structured so that you do, we do, you do, we do, and that's the relationship we now have. Next slide. So many of you have seen this slide for the last, we'll call it three to 3.5 years. This is something we came up with because it's a easy represent, I shouldn't say easy, but it's a fair representation. So the first thing I would point out is you can see, formerly we tended to only focus on the total operating costs. So you can see what the total operating expenses, this is from the model. This is as we've just completed it. So $4,295 is what the operating costs are for a typical single family home in Broomfield. The public investment side, that's the combination of the bonds, the CIP, the other things, is roughly $2,250. Well, it's not roughly, it's $2,250 for a typical household. So the total cost is $6,545 per year per home for a single family home. We can do this for the mid-density housing. We can do it for the high-density housing. We can do it for each of the commercial types. So as you may have recalled from the conversation that you had on the two concept reviews related to the hospitals a few weeks back, there was an estimation of what the cost for a nonprofit facility of 500,000 square feet. That's the same thing. That was the first draft from this model. We wanted to get it up. It's been refined a little bit, so it's a little bit different than it was that day, but nevertheless, it was in the same range. So here you can see it. So as you go to your right coming down, then you can see the net fiscal impact. The revenues from a typical single family home is that. Now I'm going to take a quick moment of executive privilege, if you will. Sales tax. It's one of the things that oftentimes developers will talk about, especially residential developers, like, well, you should count all the sales tax going to be generated by the household that's moving here and attribute it to the households. Well, that isn't quite how the world works. So we have a King Soopers, and I'm going to use them as the example, at 120th. I don't know exactly the proportion of people that come to that King Soopers from Westminster, but it is probably a significant number. They don't come right up to 120th and turn around and go back. So they will shop there. People from Erie may shop there, wherever, or Thornton, because they're coming over for some other reasons. So what we know is the sales tax, a portion of it should be attributed, as I mentioned earlier, to online shopping. Another portion should be attributed to the bricks and mortar, i.e. the mall as an example, and the stores within the mall. So we have figured it out. Graham and I and Byron spent some time trying to think through that. I did some research at the national level. We've talked to AECOM, who is our consultant on this, to talk a little bit more about that. So there's an element of the sales tax that will be attributed to the single family home differently than a townhome or mid-density home. But we split it up so that it's not all going to the grocery store location, the bricks and mortar store, but it's actually also attributed in here. So that gives you the example of the types of detail and the things we thought about. Moving on then, you'll see something. So next we have the house. You've seen this before. You can see both the amount. These are by what we're kind of referring to as the groupings of of departments. And so you can see them. Organizational services, as you can imagine, is HR and IT as an example. I mean, we can give you that list, but this gives you a sense of the breakdown all the way through. And if you're wondering where you fit, because obviously we spend a little bit of money, the city and county of Broomfield provides some support for the city council. You are part of governance and leadership, as is the CMO and the city attorney's office, and one or two others. But you can see everything is captured there. All of our operating costs are on that side. Then, and Jen and I were talking about this, Manager Hoffman and I were talking about this, and I'm like, well, how do we want to put in the capital? And we decided we'll build a garage. So we put the garage on, and that's our capital investment side. That is our public investment, and you can see what the breakdown is there. And you can see, and the reason why we decided we needed to do this and start putting this in is the CIP new projects versus the CIP maintenance and replacement. And that will continue to evolve. Now, I'm going to say this, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to say it again. Enterprise activities are not in this. So while Ken uses some of the information we're doing and building from, he has his own model and the work that they're doing. And you've heard that for the last year and a half. And Byron and Graham and Ken have worked really hard on that. We're not trying to replace all of that too. We're recognizing the strength there, but this allows for us to understand the general fund side. Next slide, please. So in summary, here is, we mentioned before, we have multiple chapters of this storytelling that we're doing. This is effectively, as Graham hinted last week or 2 weeks ago, this is chapter 2. We have more chapters coming. You can see them. We did not name them by chapter, but by the date. We are thinking through those, and you can see a number of them ending up so that we get to September 8th, which is really one of the major chapters where he brings forward the budget and all of that. At that, Mayor and council members and Mayor Pro Tem online and others, I appreciate your time and your patience as I went through all of this. Again, I would just end this with, this gives you the sense of the whole, gives you it to you at at kind of the conceptual level. The model is absolutely working now. You will see the results of it next week in one of the memos. I waited to part my portion of the memo in till the model was done. It is now in. And Anna and Lynn and Brandon were very kind to give me until yesterday to actually put my part in for a memo that goes out on Wednesday. But it's all done. And then the new model, while it's working, we're going to have a policy interface to it that will have a look, not like the House, but it'll be that kind of more summary look, but it will also have the buttons that we can play with and change some of the factors. So at that, Mayor, I conclude my presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all. Oh, wow, I am blown away. I have lots to talk about, but I'm going to go to my colleagues first. And I see our online folks are there. Who would like to start us off? Is that you, Councilmember Cohen?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation and the future model, though I was thinking about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where you spent hundreds of years processing data to come up with the answer, and the answer is 42. And then they say, well, what do I do with that? And they say, well, you need to start processing more data to figure out what the question was. But I do worry about data paralysis.
Yes.
And to get to the right answers. And one of the challenge with development projects that you talked about is they don't come to us strategically. They come to us chronologically. We have to take them as they come. And as you noted, we do get that little line in the memo that says, well, if you do this, this will cost you $150,000 a year in perpetuity. But it isn't really put in context. I'm hoping the model will put into context what that means. And by that, I mean, we have fixed assets. We have 34 square miles to work with. We can't annex more property. We can go up, but we can't go out. So I'm curious if this model will include or put into context my understanding that generally you need, if you have a certain percentage of land that's residential and a certain amount of land that's commercial, and the commercial has to support the residential, you need at least 15% commercial to support, say, 40% residential. Is that about accurate? Considering that we also are setting aside 40% for open space.
Right.
So we have to maximize our commercial industrial land to support the remaining 40% that's going to be residential, correct?
Yeah, so Mayor, council members, we actually go and we look at what's been approved through the PUD. We look at what's in the comp plan as an example, and when the comp plan comes forward, we'll test the comp plan accordingly as you are considering it. But the reality is what has been proposed or approved by council is a given. We don't get to, I don't get to change that, and I should not change that. So as it moves through the process, so, and we were very clear about this. When somebody's just talking about, hey, I'm thinking about doing this on the property, we don't put that into the model. We just can't. But as it begins to move forward, as it's a concept and council has given your opinions on it, and if we hear not disapproval, I don't know a good way to phrase it because I know there's no vote on it, we begin to think about how that fits into the model. So we do test it. We adjust the land use. The land use is actually in the way we've done it, and it's a group that includes Tim Pate, Matthew Deaver, Lynn, Kate, Katie, Robert, and others, and we go through this and we figure out what is there, what's been proposed, and we show what that looks like, and we try to estimate when it's coming. So we actually have the land use all the way out through 2055.
But does that,
So when you change something as a council, we're going to adjust it and we're going to report, because this is something the mayor very explicitly asked me, I'll say 3 months ago, but it's probably more like 6. I'm just trying to give myself some latitude to keep track of that. And we will give you an accounting that says, and you will hear it if there, rather than a line that says this is consistent or this is inconsistent, we'll tell you what it was and we'll tell you how it affects it,
well,
negatively or
I mean,
positively.
will it show, because we have a certain percentage of land that's not developed yet, mostly in Ward 5. Certain spots here and there, and we've said no here and there, or yes, they're here and no, but do we have enough available land for industrial and commercial to support the build-out population?
We do, and in fact, that's always been one of the things, Mayor Pro Tem and council members, sorry. You know I got to do it.
You're forgiven from doing that because
Okay.
I have a feeling that's going to be 16
Yeah,
questions.
okay, sorry. I generally say that. Is there enough land? Yes. Actually, what happened in, we'll call it the 2000s, and I don't know a particular year, is we have in the PUD approach that we had and in the way that we created, we actually put most of it in as commercial, and then it's being switched. And that's what oftentimes comes to council is a switch from a commercial designation into a residential designation. So we will keep track of that. We do know it. Can I say that we have enough? Yes. Can I say that that's where we're going to end up? That all depends on decisions as we move forward, but we will inform you of them.
So shouldn't we have a target that we need a certain percentage? If we're going to have 40% open space, and we know residential is going to be but a certain amount has to be industrial or commercial, or we can't support our residential and our amenities and all the services that come.
Yeah.
Jeff,
To calculate that.
And if I could, and I'm just going to start and let Manager Hoffman finish, is as we mentioned, there's 5 different categories of commercial. If we did an awful lot of nonprofit governmental uses and churches, we would not have enough commercial land. If we built another mall, we have more than enough. So the reality is how it balances and how it comes forward. And that is not necessarily dictated by a pure structure. It is as the markets evolve. We don't need as many new offices as we would have needed, we'll say, a decade ago. So it's about how these decisions come forward, but it's us providing you the information so you understand the context that we understand. Sorry, Manager Hoffman.
that's all right. Thank you. Councilmember Cohen, so you're at the 50,000 foot, and that's exactly where council should be, and that's where your leadership should be. That's where Brandon Rowe should be. And that is where Graham should be. So that filter really was predicated all of our additional conversations, Councilmember Cohen. It's a pretty simple formula. It's not as detailed as 750 lines, right? 34 square miles, 40% of it immediately removed. What's left? So part of this model, again, when I say it's not a softening or how we're going to work what it is that council wants to have happen on the back end, it's very transparent to say from a cumulative effect with any additional trade-offs, not taking the market into account. But when you're asking about, can we support based on PUD and STP, more importantly, to what degree are we able to say from a visionary perspective, and this hasn't occurred before, the visionary perspective has to be rooted in fiscal sustainability for the first time. And this allows us the opportunity to make those difficult decisions to say, now we have competing interests. We want affordable housing. And the question comes back to exactly your point, Councilmember Cohen. Can we afford anything additional in this arena? So financially, we're going to be able to give you that answer. When we're looking at our population, this one is a big one for Brandon Rowe. Our populations and build out, how does that reduction in population impact our infrastructure, impact our housing requirements for Broomfield, and is it correlative? So when we're looking at those costs, we know that the costs continue to increase, just what we have right now. So if we didn't increase any additional residential development other than what we've already approved, aside from the market, my question as a leader to advise council, can we afford what it is that we've already approved before we look at anything additional? That was really the impetus to be able to say to what degree, under what circumstances, and what does that flow look like? So when we have these conversations, Councilmember Cohen, moving forward on any kind of development, when we say it's net negative, we're going to be able to give you the details about that net negative instead of at the 30,000 foot saying it's just not going to produce the amount of revenue that we thought was going to produce. That's the difference between a 5-year snapshot and a repeatable process on that model.
Yeah, and my hope is that I don't get 78 lines of data, but 10, because I think too much data, we start to regret the decisions we made because we don't understand what we're deciding. There's just too much input. But if we fix it to the certain baseline things we have to have, I think that would help. And that, to that point, on slide 13, at the bottom of that, there's a reference that I'd like to revisit and get to it myself.
It's the code update that we're going to actually start being able to
So
make fiscal
where it
decisions.
says staff anticipates returning with a potential ordinance so fiscal and financial impacts of future land uses may be expressly included among findings council can evaluate for new PUD plans and rezonings. So my understanding, one, now we can't.
Correct.
But you're saying if we passed this potential ordinance, we could
Correct.
say to a developer, well, that's all nice and sweet and you meet every single standard we put out there, but we can't afford you.
Correct.
Okay. And that's something, do other communities do this? Are we late? And how revolutionary is this that we can say to someone, it's like a certificate of need process?
I'm going to let our attorney take that after 16 conversations of saying, how could we not have included this conversation? Thank you for pulling that slide out. Councilmember Cohen, I'll be able to remove that from my follow-up.
It's not uncommon, Councilmember Cohen, to see it in standards across the nation. However, this is a relatively new, being in the last 10 to 15 years, standard or criteria that we're seeing in these types of codes. So it really depends on when a organization, community like Broomfield or other communities are updating their code.
Okay. So if we did it now, we wouldn't be able to defend it because it's not specifically written in the code.
Correct.
Correct.
Yes.
We have to have that defined as one of the reasons.
Yes.
Okay.
A criteria that you would rely on, similar to, the positive impacts on the neighbors, negative impacts on the neighbors, traffic. Those are specifically listed as criteria in our code.
Thank you. I had one last too picky a question, but I'll ask in case you've considered it, because it's just a question of gentrification of neighborhoods as our neighborhoods age. that has economic impacts, is that calculated into that? Because we're gonna have a whole bunch of new, and then we're gonna have some old that are gonna have to be revitalized at some point.
And absolutely, we have engaged the former, well, Elizabeth Gardner, who's the former state demographer for 20 years. We've engaged her to help us both for the comp plan and the work there, but also to inform it. And one of the things we've asked her to look at is evolutions of neighborhoods. So what you've seen, the example I oftentimes use is first and second filing. They were formative neighborhoods in the community. Families grew up there. They became empty nesters. Then they became, single senior parents or seniors. And now we're seeing them refill back up with families, oftentimes young children, and starting that evolution. We are looking at it from the standpoint of across the city and how that evolves across the city. So neighborhoods are not static, and they will evolve. And so we're looking at that now. And Elizabeth will help us with that, and it'll end up coming through in the comp plan.
And the same for business, since it's not,
Exactly.
offices are gonna come and go and different uses are gonna come and go.
So again, as Anna, back when she was the community development director with Katie, and doing that work, we began to talk about how we're going to really help and figure out reinvestment, and perhaps rehabilitation or redevelopment of properties. So this has been something we've been working through, but we really have engaged Elizabeth to help us understand that change within the population and the household size. As far as business size, we've done that a little bit, even with the AECOM report related to the West Side last year.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Next is Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much, Mr. Romine, and thank you for redeveloping this idea and understanding, where we're going to be at fiscally with our commercial and with our land plans. If there's one thing that I ever tell anyone who's new on council is that our land is very precious. We aren't making any more of it, and we have to utilize it to the best of our ability. And there could be a chance where we could end up like other cities where we kind of overcompensate in housing, and then we don't have enough commercial actually to build affordable housing. So there is a big difference there too. I worry about developers, maybe when they're a part of this application process, they often will tell me, we want more predictability when this happens. So what are we doing to let developers know of this process? And will housing or mixed use or commercial applications, will they know that earlier on in the process versus waiting to come here? So I just wanted to know what that looks like.
So I will cite the example, because we have been doing that for a while. It hasn't been something that's out of the blue. You heard it both with the Broomfield Town Square folks when they came through for their SDP roughly 3 years ago. We did do an analysis, and we had long conversations with them about what the fiscal impact was. With Great Western, as an example, when that proposal came through to council, we went and I talked to them several times before so that they understood what the implications are. We don't want, when somebody's standing before you and you ask that question, to be an aha moment. So it has been Manager Hoffman's expressed desire. Some of you have been on council long enough. You remember we had this really kind of funky matrix that talked about all the different types of development we were encouraging. The philosophy then and the philosophy remains now. We don't always say no. We say perhaps not there. So when they're in a conversation, whether it be with the planning folks or myself or Manager Hoffman or Robert in Economic Vitality, if there's a good developer, if there's a good business, if there's a good something, we're trying to figure out if there's a place in Broomfield where it would fit before we just say no. And so we try to be that people, and on the same time, on the fiscal side, we try to tell them. And we're very clear about it ahead of time. This is going to have a negative fiscal note. It's just going to. You need to explain it. You need to tell the council what the benefits may be, but we're not going to change our fiscal note because you call me 3 times. So we are very clear and have been for a while, and we will continue to be that way. Manager Hoffman, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I don't, Councilmember Hinkle. I think oftentimes that the work with developers, when they say they want repeatable and reliable, means I want to do what I want to do. And when I come to you, I want you to say yes. So again, this model, while helpful for staff and council, It's not predicting the future, right? It's taking particularly what the decisions that have been made prior to our team and this council and how that interplays and restricts council's ability to say yes. And if they say yes, what that means short-term and long-term. So from a developer perspective, I mean, we have seen developers shouldn't be surprised by the key findings section, which I think the mayor will remember and Councilmember Lim will certainly remember. We didn't used to have a key findings section where that conversation, that's the first time they're seeing it is long before that process begins. So overcoming certain hurdles based on various developments is something that Brandon and Lynn Merwin pride themselves on to make sure that, again, not process oriented, but the communication is really clear about what those hurdles are going to be and to what degree they choose to overcome them by the time they get to council.
Okay, that's good. I just want to make sure that they know ahead of time and, all of those sorts of things, especially with the change in the process. I have two more questions. The second one is maybe not such a question, but maybe more of an ask. We know that we've had over 6,000 units approved. A lot of our units in housing have not moved forward. Is there a way that we could see how much land use we have shifted from commercial or mixed use just strictly to housing? Is there a way to show our new council members? Okay, I think that would be really helpful because I have a memory being on council for 6 years, knowing where we've approved housing.
I do too. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
We'll heat map it. We'll GIS it.
That'll be helpful.
Thank you.
Just to know like where our trajectory is, because you can overcompensate where you're over approving housing and then you don't have enough revenue to build, your inclusionary housing. I don't know, your funding for your housing or funding for fish, that is where we get a lot of our funding for our nonprofits too. So we've got to keep that in mind. Third question here, and this is just sort of my wish list. I like to repeat it, but just eventually, not today, not tomorrow, maybe even not next year or the year after, but a business resilient dashboard to show our business resiliency. And I wrote an email a while back just talking about trends in taxes, any vacancies that we have in our commercial foot traffic that we can track with AI, and any sort of mapping that we could do. And that way we can kind of target any of our grants that we have for our businesses. And I feel like that would really help us out a lot. But whatever we can do to get that business resiliency dashboard would be helpful. So thank you so much. Yeah.
That's a great conversation to have with the business chamber. From a tracking perspective and a licensing perspective, we've talked about having those in our economic vitality. Yeah, we'll have a follow-up conversation with the business chamber. I think from a dashboard perspective, from a management, that would be something that members would be very attracted to join the chamber, is being able to have that capability.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we can partner with the chamber quite a
bet.
bit on that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem Lim.
Thank you, Mayor. As I'm going to follow up on the point that Councilmember Cohen made about the new criteria. As someone who's been around here a while, I can't tell you how excited I am to know that we are coming forward with a criteria that council can use to ensure that the fiscal and financial impacts of the proposed future land uses are expressly included among the criteria for land use decisions. So I'm a little like, I kind of want to ask, where have you been all my life? But this comes from a movie, I think. But so why do we have to wait until the third quarter of 2026? Can somebody explain why now? Why not previously? And why do we have to wait until the third quarter of 2026? It seems to me like there could be some projects in the near future where we could use this.
Well, I'd like to do it next Tuesday.
Ms. Rogers?
So this would be an ordinance change. It is legally permissible to do, but timing is dependent on council's calendar. And as council knows, staff also that would be working on establishing this criteria also has many other projects on the plate. So if council would want to do this sooner, the timing is not a legal issue.
It's a bandwidth issue. It is reprioritizing in order to
Right.
finish this up at an accelerated schedule. Because we'll ask the people that are actually doing it, that it's still not ready for prime time.
So staff loves when I do this, Miss Merwin. But
It's
I'm
okay.
I'm with Mayor Pro Tem to say, where have you been all my life?
So maybe not Tuesday, but Wednesday next week. No.
There you go, Miss Merwin.
So I have thought about this a little bit, and we could try and shuffle some priorities around and look at doing it later this spring. And, I think if that's agreeable, I think that's the best we can do at this moment without explicit direction, you shall.
Does that, we haven't gone through all the council comments yet, but if that seems amenable to my colleagues to accelerate this or expedite it, I think that's,
We'll discuss that
Possible.
during our
If
debrief
it's possible,
tomorrow.
right,
Yes, it
you know.
is.
we're making the ask. So
Yes.
you guys can let us know if it's not,
Thank you.
of course.
Okay, thank you. I had another question. So a few years ago, we were going through, it seemed to me that I was hearing that staff was going to a gradual unveiling of development agreements that uncovered some nasty surprises. Have we, in preparation for this modeling, have we uncovered the nasty surprises that we're going to in these development agreements?
I'm going to take that one, Mr. Romine.
Ms. Rogers, Ms. Hoffman.
I was gonna say, or Nancy, yeah, Nancy can help me. Yes, and this team that is standing behind Mr. Romine and Mr. Romine, yes, Mayor Pro Tem, it's been another one of these 3-year journeys. So in parallel of getting the long-range financial plan, can't have a long-range financial plan with the various elements and not include what those decisions were in the past. The documentation for those business development agreements, while intact and on paper, there wasn't an inventory. There wasn't a way that you could swiftly identify other than going piece by piece by piece by piece. So I can confidently say we're about 90%. I don't think that there's going to be one big looming, Mayor Pro Tem, and Jeff can weigh in on this. I do think that some of the modeling will reflect what those findings were to varying degrees. And so when we look at, Mayor Pro Tem, for example, some of the development that's occurring in Baseline, it was part of what Mr. Romine was referring to before, which was in that area, there was an anticipated 16 million square feet of commercial that was then reduced to 1 million square feet of commercial that is now reduced to Center Street, X square foot of commercial. But what is discovered in those business development agreements that has now been memorialized so that we can operationalize what that outcome is. It's more about the development agreements and to what degree the revenue was segregated. How much sales tax, how much property tax, how much use tax was contributed now and in the future. So even when new councils come on board and there are commercial developments that are approved that generate retail, we will have in those memos indicating while that's wonderful, it's not a boon for sales tax or property tax or use tax, because you have to look at it through the filter of those prior business development agreements. BTS is very similar. When Mr. Romine speaks of Flatirons was really the first time Jeff and I sat in that IT room for weeks with lessons learned from baseline, lessons learned from prior business development agreements of how to be able to say to the developers, you do a little for us and we'll do for you. You do a little for us and we'll do for you. So that has become the blueprint. But that is not to say those impacts from the prior business development agreements will continue to influence and create a lot of discipline for this council because the filter is so vastly different. Mr. Romine, do you have anything to add on that one?
No, Manager Hoffman, I think you covered it well. And if you want to look at the person that's actually really organized us, really done that work, it's Maddie, who's in the front row, and that's really been her role in this, as well as helping me with the documentation. But she has really dug into the agreements and has created this worksheet that is easy for us to find things and answer questions, because we have the questions all the time, just as council does.
And Jeff Schreier, who really started the process.
Started the process years before.
That's great.
It's
Thank
a
you.
process.
Thank you. That's good to hear. I had one more really specific question. A detail, will you, as this model is used, there will be different levels, I guess I would say, or a progression of in a progression of time, there'll be different evaluations that are used. Will those long-range financial plan clearly have marked what level or period of time that it was developed in? Will there be 20 long-range financial plan 2026 quarter 3, long-range financial plan 2027 quarter 1? Will all of that be clearly marked on the land use development that model proposal that we're seeing?
Yes, what we're trying to think through is exactly how we do that, whether it's in a summary report that basically says, here's what it is for this period of time and what those salient factors are. Because as you can imagine, if, as we saw during the pandemic and the economic response to the pandemic, we saw inflation and other things shoot up dramatically, that would obviously change the outcomes of the model, and we'll have those forward impacts. So we're trying to think through exactly how we maintain that history, if you will. At the same time, I would say, in working with Brandon, he's very good about, he is very structured in the way that he thinks about data. And so we probably will begin more of a historic pattern of when we adjust something because it was originally planned for 400,000 square feet of commercial and 300 housing units in a mixed use development. And now as we've gotten to the SDP, it's switched downward. And then as it goes forward, there's already some things holistically in it, but we'll probably keep track of it from the standpoint of those changes and that timing of the change. It's a massive data issue, but we do need to have some stability in each of those forecasts from the standpoint of why is the 27 one different than the 26? So yes, it's something we've been thinking about, trying to figure out how to do, because that creates the internal integrity. And quite frankly, for council members, that gives you the confidence that we are keeping track of things.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
All right, thank you. Next is Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. So one of my questions is, are we going to have any sense with this model of the potential range or distribution of outcomes? And I think I worry sometimes about shape of a distribution can be this, or it can be like this, right? And so depending on some of the factors that are out of our control, will we have a sense of how volatile the future can be for us depending on what decisions we make?
So yes, so first off is I have lived this life for a while analytically and as an economist. So for some things you have to just give a single forecast, but you just have to. And because other people need it that way. Sometimes you do a low, medium, high, which by the way, when you do a low, medium, high, everybody generally picks the one they like. And I'm not going to say that from a policy standpoint. I've just watched it happen. So what we do know is those 10 variables that you saw, we will be able to adjust it as well as some of these other variables like the share of labor costs and some other things. So both how they go in from the factor, the extra or the outside factors, but also how they apply. And so we will be able to test those things and check it out. So part of this is we are not bringing, I want to assure every council member, we're not bringing the model in here and I'm going to sit here and you all in your questions have me type in different things. That is not the intent. The intent is as we're working through things, leadership, the administrative leadership, Manager Hoffman, the 2 deputies, several of the department heads that work on it, we'll test those out to be able to say, here's what we think is happening. But yes, as you all talk about things, we will probably test those as scenarios as we're building things up to just try to understand it. I have already done it a little bit to see what the volatility is from certain variables, obviously in order to make sure I'm setting it correctly. I don't want, if governmental costs switch from 5% up to 8%, the whole thing blows up and we go bankrupt in 3 years. And so you can imagine it is, I don't mean to get into some of the vernacular, but it is effectively a linear programming model.
And Councilmember Delgadillo, the goal for us isn't to predict the future, right? The goal for us is just to improve the quality of decision-making before council determines the next 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, right? So it's, again, it's one of those obligating fiscal obligations for future. So Jeff will love to run those, the predictive models of the future. But really again, to reiterate it, it's not, we're not using that model other than, maybe some auxiliary conversations, but it's established and built not to predict the future, but just to give you all as tight of a tool as we possibly can before you make any fiscal decisions that are tied to long-term obligations. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. And I realize what I'm asking is, I think it's a fine line between rolling the dice 20 times and predicting the future. I don't think rolling the dice 20 times is predicting the future. I think that's just running a few different scenarios. But I totally get that. I'm right on the cusp of asking you all to look in a crystal ball. So I appreciate that. Let's see what else. And then right now, I know we referenced earlier that PUD zoning in the model, we have some PUD that we think is going to be commercial, some we think is going to be residential. How is that currently split? Is that split based on what was previously approved and predicted? And now that we're seeing a lot of rezoning, are we looking more to what the current landscape of things look like? I wonder what it looks like.
And if I could, so, and first off is I appreciate your reference to the 20 rolls of the dice. I oftentimes think of as Tom Stopper play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern did, where they flip a coin 50 times in a row and it comes up heads. There are those possibilities, but that tells you something about what happened to Hamlet. Moving back though to your question, that was I have a liberal arts education. I got to use it once in a while. But going back to your question specifically, it's not just staff. I want to make it clear. So the old model, and I don't want to be, represent anything that is not true. There were 4 or 5 people that were doing this work. And they were very known. They really knew the community better than almost anybody else. And so they had a real sense of it. but I don't. I will not say I have that degree of expertise. So as I've been here and as we've been working on it, as Graham has come on, as Lynn and Anna, this has been our orientation is we bring more people into every conversation. So when we talk about the land use, I already mentioned there's 5 or 6 key staff members, city engineer, the chief building official. We also go out and call developers and say, what are you proposing to do? When are you proposing to come? Now, I'll admit, the builders, construction crews are living in a 1-year, 2-year cycle. And so they only have a vision that far out. Developers tend to have a little bit longer vision. So, you know, that's why we're very confident with those first 5 years. And I shouldn't say confident, but we feel stronger about the first 5 years. When we go out 30 years, that's when we start talking about what does it look like and what are we seeing the major trends to change. But as Manager Hoffman has talked about, we're trying to give you some information as based upon a group of experts that have been doing this, but we are not fortune tellers. We do not foresee that. So we try to do the best we can, but we do reach out far beyond staff.
Okay, that's really helpful. And yeah, I mean, once you phrase it as 30-year predictions, they're always wrong. It's just the degree to which they're wrong.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that. And I also suspect that I was one of the 2 people you called out who would love to see this model. I won't cajole you to show me this model, but it sounds very interesting. That was it. Those were my questions, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll go online to Councilmember Ward next. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't really have any questions. I will say I appreciate staff taking the time to really do a much more thorough analysis of our long-range financial plan and put more variables in there to be more accurate with where we are. But I do just want to say I have a concern with the lens that we are looking through that long-range financial plan, which is almost, I will say, in a way that we have a Gallagher amendment, which is we need a certain amount of commercial to pay for everything that's residential. And we've been operating under that assumption for, well, at least for probably 3 decades by now. And I think by continuing to look at our long-range financial plan through that lens, we do a disservice to the future of Broomfield, because we will always be under this mindset of scarcity, an artificial mindset of scarcity. And I think that's going to be detrimental for this community much further down the road, long after I am off council and everyone else on this council is off, and even longer after the current city leadership is done. And so I just want to caution my colleagues and with staff in making an assumption right off the bat with this long-range financial plan update with the lens that we're looking through it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll just add, we don't really have anything to do with the fact that non-residential property tax revenue is 4 times that of residential. So if we had a choice, it wouldn't be that unbalanced. It would be balanced like it was before pre-Tabor. But that is something we don't control. So we have to live within that, that reality. Next is Councilmember Anderson.
All right, thank you. I just have one main question related to this whole conversation about the long-range financial plan. We're talking about these clear data-driven decisions and long-term planning. And there's this piece that's coming towards us from an outside entity related to potential ballot initiatives that could increase, put a question on the ballot, on our upcoming ballot to increase the taxes by 0.5% or more to generate $10 to $15 million of revenue for a specific need. And that is completely outside all of the planning that we're doing. So I kind of have this like question about how do we start to think about that and loop that into our planning if there's this ability for bringing forward these ballot initiatives? Because that may not even be controlled by the city and county. It could be controlled by a third party. Like, how do we bring that piece into this equation? And then how do we also at the same time have this balanced discussion if we're going to start to think about, yes, I'm still not in favor of these tax increases, but if we were to go down this path before we increase 0.5% of sales tax, thinking about the other needs and where's that limit of that pain threshold where we just can't go any higher. And we also have, over the course of time, I've been kind of keeping track of what's been brought up on this dais, and there's improvements of public transportation and roads, expansion of the library, because that is woefully too small, the renovation of the courts once the PD moves into the new building, and I think there's maybe a couple others. But how do we as we're doing this long range financial plan, how do we factor in these other pieces that aren't included in the long range financial plan? And it's okay if you don't have an answer tonight. I just want to I want us to start thinking about these other possibilities that completely go away from this like big one size fits all, let's plan everything, to, oh, we'll just tack this on then at the end.
And there's two parts to the question. So first off is, we have to live, within these models, we live within the world that it is. So what tax change may be coming, whether the state's eventually going to reform tax policy across the state and we become less reliant on sales tax or whatever, or highway users taxes or whatever. We can't put that in necessarily into a model. We're not putting major tax change. We have to stay with the framework that we're given, which is that we live on that revenue slide that I showed you. The city lives on those, city county does. So that's part of it is this isn't an open world. When those types of things come forward, that is for lack of better, that's the art and the challenge of decision making is, when are those things too high? There are economists that study those types of things, that talk about what tax burden looks like and things like that. And I will tell you, that's why all economists have two hands, because there's one on each side that will tell you things are too high or too low. So this model can't do that and won't do that. So I just want to be clear about that. When you get to those types of questions, there may be ways to provide some analytic information to it, but it will not be definitive. Is that, Manager Hoffman, I don't know if you want to add anything to my.
I think the only thing that I would add, Councilmember Anderson, is historically the general rule of sales tax is 10%. Our surrounding community and Broomfield is not at that threshold. So in the past, when we've looked at, and just a little bit of clarity, the bond that we have for the police building includes the court remodel. And so we've been really clear with the court that they are backing into, again, it's part of the visionary plans being grounded in a fiscal sustainable framework. That's a great example of that, where instead of them doing a market study and a market analysis and kind of the wish list of what they would like it to be, we were really clear with them to be able to say, here's your budget. If you go over your budget, you're welcome to, but that's not on us. So just for clarity on the court piece, that box has been checked. Interestingly enough, on the library, I've been having walks and conversations with Catherine Lineup as we think about how do we, from an operational perspective, it's just like every other household, you have to live within your means. And so to Mr. Romine's point, we know what the revenue is. We're getting pretty good at discovering the volatility, not the control piece, but what that looks like. So we are identifying and finding operational efficiencies from a staff perspective, from an ongoing administration perspective. It's that interesting, it's not even balance really, right? It's looking at the multitude of things and understanding from a resident's perspective, what is that tolerance level? This model isn't going to help us with that tolerance level. Back to the kind of providing those analytics, we can certainly say that here's, we're at 8.15 right now. Here's what any kind of indication, the amount that it would generate, and then the amount of the overall sales tax, what that rate would look like for Broomfield and how it would compare to our other neighborhoods. Council and the community will have to weigh in on to what degree is that tolerable, under what circumstances would we then be able to look at other possible increases for whatever that need would be, whether it's roads and or transportation or transit or any of the other amenities and services.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we have Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Romine, for the presentation. So my fellow council members here have asked almost all of my questions. I only have one remaining, so that is excellent. I was curious, in the memo, you mentioned an analysis to produce the economic component of the model. I'm curious if that's Elizabeth Gardner as kind of a subject matter expert, or if you have other intents to bring in external expertise, because it specifically mentions external consultants.
Right. So thank you for the question. I should have mentioned it earlier. We have engaged AECOM, the economics group out of Chicago and Boston. They are looking at the model right now, the final version. That they don't mind looking at rows and rows, and others actually they prefer it because they can see the clarity that they need to see. But they have reviewed it on a very preliminary level. They have provided us a little bit of their findings already, but they will be providing at the end of April a report on the model and how they see it. At the same time, I've asked them to go ahead and give us any things that you would suggest we make improvements to it. Again, this is not a static model. This is not going to have a 5-year shelf life. This is something that we will make we'll evolve it. As council ask questions, we will evolve it to be able to think about how to bring those into the conversations going forward. So AECOM is that group. There's an economist in Chicago and an economist in Boston and the program managers in Connecticut. So it's a very interesting period of time. Several council members have met the lead on it. He has come when we talked about a couple of the other projects. So we've engaged them. Secondly, after we complete that, then as we've already met with them once, the GFOA people that are helping us with ERP, they are very interested in what we're doing. And so that's also, the model will be incorporated. We're not exactly sure yet into the ERP. So as they will be looking at the model and looking about how we produced it and what it's doing and determine how that might fit within the ERP. So what we really are thinking about this going through evolutionary steps and not being static. I would go back and I don't want to correct, it's not a correction, but I do want to say one thing that I'd forgotten to mention earlier. Each year in the council's budget that you approve, there is a short section that's called the Long Range Financial Plan. It's a roughly 3 to 5 page section. You can go back and look at it each year. That's what we will also be doing. So that static question, I think it was Mayor Pro Tem asked, how would we be keeping track of that? Part of it will be kept track through that section within each year's approved and adopted budget, which will be talking about that longer range philosophy. I have looked at what other communities do. Some other communities do it. It's oftentimes 3 paragraphs or 2 pages, depending on it. And it oftentimes just focuses it on bond, but we'll be looking at it from the whole perspective. And Graham and I and Byron have already talked a little bit about that section. So you'll see that too.
Wonderful, thank you. I will just say, as a new person to council, I am very much looking forward to having some of this information at our fingertips, and I'm sure I'll have more questions later. Thanks.
All right, so any other questions from my colleagues? I'll just, don't see any. I'll do a little reminiscing here because I think I'm the only one that was here when Pat Soderberg would come up. She'd be sitting in the back there, you guys remember, with her big old binder. And as soon as we'd have a rezoning from commercial to residential, she'd, first thing before the presentation even started, would start with Pat outlining the impacts to the long-range financial plan. Not really outlining, it was kind of an over-under graph that kind of showed, we want to be above the line. And then every time we rezone to residential, it gets closer to the line. And we definitely wanted to avoid going below the line. Some of y'all remember that? This is much more sophisticated than that, right? But it was at least a benchmark that helped us understand how every decision we make impacts other decisions. And I think it's something you're going to learn on the job, because it is very important to have that planning, that ability to plan. And that's what my concern is, that we plan everything at the city and the county level. We don't leave things to chance. We have to plan. But when outside forces come and change those plans is when we should all start to try to safeguard what we've created. And I think this does a good job of putting in those guardrails, especially if we can justify that, you can't come in and tell us that we need to build, 50 units per acre on this commercial parcel, right? Because that would totally demolish our financial plans. Is that fair?
I think from a planning perspective, a couple of things from Councilmember Cohen, from Councilmember Delgadillo, to the question from Councilmember Hinkle, when we're looking at what we thought was going to happen and how we have financially made decisions based on what we thought was going to happen. Again, really looking at those 34 square miles. And even to Councilmember Ward's point about to what degree is I don't know, I'm gonna sit in a little bit about the scarcity. But the bottom line for us in this model, Mayor, is can we financially afford to make the decisions that council is going to be required to make now and in the future? And if we are not, so we're pretty good at the revenue piece, what are those impacts? So if we decide on more affordable housing, what is that? To what degree is that trade-off? So the goal isn't to say no more trade-offs with commercial.
Mm-hmm.
That is not what this model is for. Again, this model is the transparency to be able to say, if this happens, then here's the problem solving that will need to occur on the back end based on prior decisions. So yes, when there are things that occur, whether it's legislative or even council decisions that modify that plan, it requires problem solving. And the more consistent we can be on the front end, the less problem solving we'll have on the back end.
All right. Well, I learned so much, and I appreciate all of your work on this, everyone, and can't wait to take the next steps with you all for this. I know it's been long awaited, so thank you. Thank you all.
Mayor, thank you, council.
All right, our next study session item this evening is related to potential updates to the Broomfield Municipal Code related to EV charging as a primary land use. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you. It's fascinating, isn't it, that all three of these issues are very connected to the future. So Alex Bradshaw, our senior planner, is going to walk us through this. And thank you to council for those additional questions that you sent. Those questions in advance always allow us to incorporate those answers, and it also allows us to think through things that perhaps we hadn't thought about before. So we're grateful for that. Mr. Bradshaw.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. The project for you this evening is in regards to potential updates to the Broomfield Municipal Code in response to House Bill from 2024 1173 regarding electric vehicle. I'll be referring to it as EV going forward. Charging station regulations, including EV charging station proposed as primary use on a property within Broomfield, administrative review processes for approving primary and accessory use EV charging stations, and place and location regulations for EV charging stations. Next slide. So here I'll just give a little background. I'm sure everyone's familiar with what EVs are. But a primary use means the main or principal use of which the land or structures are used. So EV charging as a primary use involves providing electricity to customers for a fee through multiple charging station ports, which are grouped together within a single lot. Charging stations are typically mounted on a wall or are installed as freestanding pedestals. The electricity is transmitted through the cord with the handle that connects to the port to the vehicle. Payment for this service is typically made by customers either online or at the charging stations themselves. EV charging stations can be offered at 3 different levels and are determined by the amount of power they supply and at the rate they can charge a vehicle. Levels 2 and 3 are most commonly found in commercial settings, and level 2 chargers can charge the EV vehicle battery to 80% in a few hours, and then the level 3 chargers can provide the same level of charge in about 30 minutes. At this time, EV charging stations have been predominantly installed as accessory uses, meaning they're subordinate to the primary use on the site. These charging stations have typically been those level 2 chargers. Charging stations as accessory uses typically make up a small portion of existing parking lots, and this service generally is secondary in nature to the primary use and is installed. The installation of these chargers are typically included as part of the infrastructure designed for that primary use. Next slide. So here's a little bit of a historical background. Colorado legislature, passed legislation in 2024 regarding municipal regulation of EV charging systems, which requires streamlining the process for local governments to approve permits for developing electric vehicle charging infrastructure. In 2023, City Council adopted the Colorado Model Electric Ready, and Solar Ready Code. That's established a minimum requirements for number of EV charging parking spaces for new developments and for certain existing developments that meet major renovation or addition thresholds. And in 2022, Broomfield City Council created a definition for EV charging as a primary use, which was considered as a gas station for zoning purposes. The intention at the time was to allow commercial electric vehicle charging to be an allowable use in a zoning document referencing gas stations as the permissible use. Next slide, please. This slide displays Broomfield's current EV charging station regulations and review practices. The term EV charging station is not currently listed as a standalone permitted use in the Broomfield Municipal Code. Instead, the Broomfield Municipal Code considers electric charging of vehicles, as I previously stated, as a gas station, and this is for zoning purposes when it's a primary use of the property. EV charging stations are also permitted as accessory uses, meaning that they are subordinate or incidental to the primary use of the property. These charging stations typically, as I had mentioned, are the level 2 or level 3 chargers in commercial, industrial, and mixed-use areas. Other than the Colorado Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready Code, which establishes the minimum number of EV charging spaces for new developments, EV charging stations do not have specified setback requirements or design standards within the Broomfield Municipal Code. Accessory use EV charging stations are proposed within a PUD district with an approved site development plan, or when there is an approved urban renewal site plan, they are reviewed and approved through an administrative modification process. This process does not require a public hearing, and those requests are typically approved by the city manager's office. Next slide. Streamline of the process for local governments to approve these permits for developing EV charging infrastructure, including both primary and accessory use EV charging facilities, are one of the new requirements of the House bill from 2024. The new House bill also requires that primary use EV charging stations be permitted by right in all zoning districts, except in residential and agricultural zone districts, for which they are to be allowed as a use by special review. And the last requirement from the new House bill is that charging stations and associated supply equipment shall be permitted in all minimum required setbacks. Next slide. So going off of what's required, this is what staff is proposing to change to the Broomfield Municipal Code. So first is to add EV charging as a primary permitted use in commercial, mixed use, and industrial zone districts where explicitly listed. Second is to introduce new definitions related to EV charging stations. Currently, as I had mentioned, the EV charging station is positioned underneath gas stations, which we want to separate those two uses. Third is add certain regulations regarding place and location for EV charging stations and associated supply equipment. This would be in response to the state requirement having them be allowed in all established minimum setback requirements. Next would be codify the administrative review process for EV charging as an accessory use within plan unit developments. And lastly is establish an administrative review process for EV charging stations as a primary permitted use within plan unit development districts. Next slide. So here's just kind of an outline of, on the left, we have the state law requirement, and on the right, we have what staff is proposing, which is a variation from what's being required. So what I had already mentioned, the first one is that EV charging stations permitted as a primary use within all zoning districts, and except for residential and agriculture, which the state is requiring to have a use by special review. Staff's proposal is to only have it as a primary permitted use within commercial, mixed use, and industrial zone districts. The second is charging stations and associated equipment be permitted within all minimum established setbacks. Broomfield is proposing that all of that equipment and charging stations not be located within minimum site distance areas and outside the minimum 5-foot setback from adjacent property lines. So this is consistent with other accessory structures and uses that minimum 5-foot setback. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide details public engagement and next steps. If council directs staff to proceed with the proposed ordinance, planning will establish a Broomfield voice page and we'll continue to update as we take feedback from city council. We will also publish, it will remain open throughout the first and second readings of this item, and we'll be sure to update council if there are any changes. Notice of code amendment will be placed in the community update, and staff will be finalizing the draft ordinance and tentatively scheduled for the first reading in April of this year. Next slide. So here we have 5 questions that we're looking for direction from council this evening, and I will read through all 5. We can go back and revisit each one as necessary. So the first question is does the council desire to update the Broomfield Municipal Code to allow EV charging as a primary permitted use in commercial, industrial, and mixed use zone districts? Number 2 is allow EV charging stations as a primary permitted use in any residential, agricultural, transit-oriented development or other zone districts. Does council desire to include a minimum setback and site distance requirement as set forth in the draft ordinance? Number 4, does council desire to support an ordinance that would authorize the city manager or their designee to approve site development plans for EV charging stations as primary permitted use, which is similar to the current practice for approving EV charging stations as an accessory use? And lastly, does council desire to direct staff to incorporate the ACE's recommendation to consider incorporating limitations to the size of the commercial accessory uses, such as a convenience store that may be proposed with an EV charging station as a primary use? And that concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have time for questions and we need 5 points of feedback from you guys. So do you have a chart to track this?
We do, yes.
Awesome. All right, let's get started with Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe it's just me and maybe I'm trying to understand the definitions, but it sounds like the state is directing us to do what we're doing. So it sounds like they said everything except for residential, which is what we're doing. Are we just codifying it with within the language that we have in Broomfield then? Or is this, because I notice also you guys said industrial. I don't know if that includes light industrial as well in the industrial. I'm assuming it does. are we just putting it in words that we use?
Essentially, yes, especially for accessory uses. At the moment, accessory uses are permitted in all zone districts. And especially for plan unit developments, they go through an administrative process already. So it is just codifying what we're currently doing.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Okay. So 1, yes, update it. I'm assuming no on number 2, unless we can think of other zone districts that we really need it in. I would say allow them in 80 residential. I don't know why we wouldn't allow it in a TOD, because it's also an area. Number 3, include minimum setback. Yes. I just support what the staff wants. Number 4, yes. Number 5, yes. Thank you.
All right. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Mayor, so I'll start going through these and then I think I have just 1 or 2 questions. So for the first one, yes, that makes sense. The second one, no, and I feel very strongly that it should not be permitted in a TOD because that land should be set aside for higher uses such as high density residential so that people can actually live close to a transit-oriented area or businesses, something like that, where it's actually a destination. So I do feel very, very strongly that to go with the staff recommendation that that one is not included. So I appreciate that. So my one little question with the setback, I get setbacks for the road. Why is there the 5-foot setback from other properties? Is that just, and I realize it is not just for this use, this is a thing we do in general, but could you refresh my memory of why that's helpful and why that's useful and why 5 feet is the magic number?
So as you stated, and as I had mentioned before, the 5 feet is our typical minimum setback for accessory structures and uses. This is just to further take that out of that minimum site distance area. So that 5 foot also attributes into that. And then essentially it's really to maintain the property. We don't like seeing it, especially with these type of developments, stuff right up on the property line. There actually have been some new building code requirements where if developments are going within certain number of feet from the property line, it kind of triggers additional reviews and additional paperwork to confirm that's where that's actually located. So to stay out of that 5-foot area, it kind of makes sure that we're checking the boxes of what we want to see for an accessory use.
Councilmember Delgadillo, I'd also like to add, Lynn Merwin, planning, that 5 feet is really a minimum when we consider other things that might need to happen underground. So utilities may need to run along a property line. It's very typical to have utilities running and to have easements along those property lines. 5 feet is really a bare minimum for that.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you for that additional information because yeah, I was wondering why 5? Why is that useful? And for kind of that ground infrastructure, that makes a lot of sense. And then 4, yes, and 5, yeah, sure, I'm open to that. And I guess I just had one question, so I'm good. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Next is Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. If you could go back to the slide that says proposed variations from HB 24. Help me out understand what's different between the state and the Broomfield proposal precisely? What are we leaving out?
And just to clarify, are you referencing the top 2 or the bottom 2?
Top.
The top?
Top
Okay,
2.
Yep, so the requirement is permitted in all zone districts, and then having residential and agricultural is used by special review. We're only having it in as a permitted use. We're not offering that use by special review option for the remaining zone districts. We're just allowing use by permitted
So
by right.
It's just the elimination of the use by special review. That's the only difference?
Correct.
Okay. So there aren't any zones being left out or anything like
It
that?
would just be the residential and agricultural and the transit-oriented development.
We're leaving out the transit?
Correct. That's one of the questions that we're looking for direction this evening.
Okay, thank you. That helps. I'm fine with number one. I really don't know why we would leave it out of the Todd. No pun intended. I think the EV chargers are needed wherever we can get them. That makes EV cars and motorcycles and scooters easier to use if there's more chargers. So I wouldn't want to exclude them from that. And I'm fine with the rest.
Thank you. You put him back up. Okay, is that it?
Sure.
We're gonna go online next to Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple quick questions just for clarification and making sure I'm understanding. Currently, if a developer were to propose an EV charging area as a primary use, that would be done through special review right now, similar to the way we do gas stations.
Councilmember Ward, Lynn Merwin, Planning. So if a applicant submitted for EV charging as a primary permitted use, it would require, if it was in a PUD district, PUD zone district, it would require a site development plan today. And there would have to be a neighborhood meeting, there would have to be a concept review, there would have to be 1 to 2 hearings, depending on the size of the property. And it would go through a full public hearing process. The proposal here tonight, the distinction is we're proposing for this to be approved administratively, requiring a site plan. Staff needs something to review, but it would allow for staff to review it and prepare a memo that would be forwarded, as our typical process is, to the city manager's office for review and approval. If the city manager did not feel comfortable approving that administratively, similar to the Palisade sign you reviewed last week, or I think it was last week, then the city manager could always refer it to council. There would not be a call-up provision, so I want to be clear on that. So I hope that clarifies it, but if not, let me know and we can try again.
No, that does. Thank you very much.
Okay, sure.
And I guess I should have prefaced that question with this question, which is, in thinking of an EV chargers as primary use, really we're just making an EV version of a gas station. That's how I'm thinking of it. I just want to make sure that my thinking is correct. It is late here in DC.
Yes, Lynn Merwin again. Yes, that is correct. It would probably look a lot like a gas station. We've never seen one before, but it seems we've Googled them online, and you can see they sometimes have a canopy with solar. Sometimes they have no canopy and they're just a field of parking. Sometimes they have a convenience store or sort of a rest station, a lodge. They may refer to it as an accessory use where somebody can go in and maybe recharge their cell phones too, stretch their legs, use a vending machine, that kind of thing, use restrooms. But it does function very much like a gas station. You're correct.
Okay. I appreciate that. I'll now move on to my kind of direction. As for primary permitted uses, I do not think mixed-use zoning districts should actually be allowed to have these big EV charging stations. I think we should think of EV charging stations very much in the same way that we think of gas stations, and that they're extremely car-dependent infrastructure. Mixed-use zoning districts should be there to incentivize and kind of permit the flourishing of walkable, bikeable communities that are not dependent on the single occupancy automobile. So I don't think they should be allowed in mixed-use zoning districts. As for industrial, I'm fine with that. Commercial, I'm hesitant because EV cars are just inherently different than your traditional ICE cars, even though we have the capabilities of level 3 charging that, it takes 30 minutes to get from 20 to 80% instead of 2 or 3 hours. I think the model that we've used with concentrating charging at one place, like we have with gas stations, does not necessarily fit with EVs, and they should be more spread out throughout commercial districts. So I'm hesitant with the commercial for primary permitted use. As for issue number 2, I don't think EV charging stations should be permitted in residential, agricultural, TOD, or other zone districts, TOD especially. The whole point of a transit-oriented development is not to be dependent on the single occupancy automobile. So why we would want to concentrate car infrastructure in TOD is beyond my comprehension. I'm fine with the minimum setbacks. As to issue number 4, the ordinance to authorize the city manager or their designee, I'm fine with that. I don't have any issues with that really. And then issue number 5, the size of commercial accessory dwelling units, or sorry, commercial accessory uses. I apologize for that. I think that would be appropriate, especially in the industrial setting. So that's my direction, Mayor.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Ward. Did y'all get that? Next, we go to Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one quick question. This is something that just kind of occurred to me so the memo talks about the standalone commercial EV charging facilities not being permitted or allowed by use by special review. And so I'm thinking of a situation in case of a residential use where this goes to special review in a residential area related to an HOA. So how might that be handled if, let's say, a neighborhood wants to offer that on their property for having a charging facility? Can you speak to how that might be handled if there's, a neighborhood that makes the realization that instead of everybody installing it in their own garage, let's put it by the park or something like that on their own property?
Thank you for the question. I think in that sense, it becomes an accessory, like if they're putting it next to their clubhouse or next to some open space that they have, it would still, especially if it's by the clubhouse, it would be an accessory use and they'd be able to go through those administrative approvals as accessory use. EV charging stations would be permitted across the board.
Okay.
That answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you. So for my direction, I would say number 1, yes. I do want to emphasize just a little bit of research over here that I think it's most appropriate that we are approving these near commercial areas where our EV drivers are able to park, they let their car charge, go shop and eat. As an EV driver, that is what I love to do when I am traveling. So it would be great to not have them in the middle of nowhere where you're just stuck in your hot car or on a bench or something. So number 2, I would say no, in line with my previous comments, as well as what council members Delgadillo and Ward have already said. I definitely don't think TODs are appropriate locations for these. Number 3, yes to the setbacks and site distance requirements. Number 4, yes. And number 5, also yes. Making sure that I do think it's appropriate to have limitations on the size of those commercial accessory uses. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Anderson.
Okay, thank you. I just have one question. What was ACE's rationale behind the limiting of the commercial, the convenience store size? Do we know why they were thinking that direction?
Thank you for your question. So the rationale behind it was more so to come up with a threshold. Well, the conversation started of what's the threshold between primary use EV charging and accessory use EV charging. And rather than having a exact ratio of chargers to square footage and doing all the math that way, it was rather just put out there to regulate the size of the accessory use commercial aspect.
Okay, so if somebody wanted to have a larger convenience store, they would just have to come forward with the convenience store as the primary use and the EV charging station as the secondary use? Is that?
I think that'd be something for planning staff to determine when they actually saw that proposal.
Okay, because we're not even there yet. Okay. All right, so I am fine with the yeses on all and no on number 2. That is fine. So thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to go to our online folks next. Councilmember Peterson?
Yes, thank you. I am hesitant about number 1 in mixed use zone districts. I would suggest that maybe that should be used by special review for the reasons that were listed by my colleagues already. I would say no to 2, yes to 3 and 4. And then I actually don't agree with number 5. I think that unlike gas stations, EV charging stations have people that are going to be there for easily a half an hour or more. And I would think of it more like the cell phone waiting lot at Denver International Airport, where there's a larger space where people can go in and hang out and get food and charge their phones, use a nice big bathroom. And I think that it seems very likely to me that if it becomes more common to have primary use EV charging stations, that they would have larger features for people to get out of their cars and spend time there. So I would suggest that if we wanted to identify the primary use, it should be based on how the revenue is being made on the site versus how big the associated convenience store or whatever might be there is. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is Mayor Pro Tem Lim.
Yes, I had a question. I wanted to give Councilmember Peterson credit for asking the question in the background that I had already flagged to ask in public. So she asked if a gas station has an EV charging, is there any threshold at which it suddenly becomes an EV charging station instead of a gas station? So the answer was if it has a gas pump, it's a gas station, no matter the ratio of fueling devices. But I'm wondering, when I look at the ordinance, I'm just wondering if that has to be specified in the definition of an EV charging station, and if it should be reflected in the definition of a gas station. So we don't have to look specifically, I guess, at that right now, but I want to flag it for staff, because to me, it should say an EV charging station may not include any gas tank. And it doesn't say that in the ordinance. So I just wanted to flag that. Does staff have any immediate response to that I'm missing here?
Councilmember Lynn Merwin, that shouldn't be a problem. That makes sense. And, we'll explore that with our legal counsel to be sure. But to me, it makes sense that we would clarify that as part of the definitions and updating those.
Okay, thanks. Okay. And answer the questions. All 1, 3, 4, 5 yes, 2 no. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. Next, we go to Councilmember Twiss.
Thank you. So jumping right into the questions, I guess number one, yes, although I share some concerns about mixed-use facilities that have been already voiced. Number two, no. Number three, setbacks, yes. Number four, the administrative process, would that be entirely reviewed by staff, or would it go to land use review committee, just not council?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner, Councilmember Twist. It would be, as proposed, it would be entirely reviewed administratively by staff. And we're having some discussion online amongst staff about whether what I said earlier is actually accurate, and we'll need to confirm. So I want to go on the record as saying we may not be able to refer, the city manager's office may not be able to refer an administrative application to council if they are not comfortable with that application. And we need to do a deeper dive on that with legal in reviewing the state requirements. So for now, I think it would be safest to say it would be entirely administrative.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
In that case, my response, not that it matters, I think, at this point, but is no, simply because it's a very new use, something that we've not seen before, and I would want it to go through a public review process. Number five, I don't really feel strongly about this. I think Councilmember Peterson's point is along the lines of what I was thinking. As you know, it's a very different use than a gas station, practically speaking, and could require a larger space to just be comfortable in while you're charging. But I'm open to that conversation. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And Councilmember McKenzie.
Thank you, Mayor. Same response as Councilmember Anderson. Do I need to say it like one by
If you could for the record.
one? Yes, two, no, 3 through 5, yes.
All right, thank you for that brevity. And we've already, has everybody gone for their first round already? I guess it seems like this is all over the place, and we wouldn't even be having to have this conversation if it wasn't for state preemption, modifying our planning and putting stuff on our agenda, this and the next item. So my question, because it says without relinquishing Broomfield's local control in this space, council can consider and modify its code provisions regarding EV charging stations entitlement reviews. So my question is, what happens if we don't pass any of this? Anybody? What happens? I'm asking a question.
It's written in the bill. It's written in the bill.
What happens if we don't? I didn't read the bill.
Well, it was supposed to be done by December 31st, 2025.
Oh,
Either
a
way.
reasonable deadline. Amazing.
Well, it was over a year and a half from when it
Mhm.
was passed. But it says one of the three options for what we can do by last December is to adopt an ordinance or resolution that establishes that the covered county or covered municipality does not intend to adopt the EV charger model code or adopt the standards, but instead will continue to utilize the covered counties or covered municipalities' existing permitting review process for EV charging systems.
So there's an opt-out?
There's an opt-out.
Is that true?
If
We
I
don't
could
have to do this?
chime in as well.
Yeah.
Staff has been in close conversation and correspondence with the state just to make sure that we're checking all the boxes that we need to. There is no, we'll say sanction or any negative impact to not complying with the state requirement. However, we are taking the path that isn't, as you see in the presentation, we are varying from certain requirements, but others we see as not fit for Broomfield. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that answer. So what about what people are saying, not putting it in a TOD is okay, but what if the people that live in the TOD don't have a garage? Because a lot of them don't. And what if they don't have a place to charge their EV? I don't understand why exclude.
So most of our TODs districts are around the bus rapid transit stations or,
Must we have?
yes. And so Arista, the flip side in original Broomfield, and then up in North Park, Baseline Community.
There's no bus there.
I know.
Okay.
But that's where our land use plan, our comprehensive plan land use plan says TOD makes sense as we look into the future. So, so in Arista, a lot of that development is fairly new. And especially within the last few years, those projects have had to put in some EV charging. So there is some infrastructure for EV with the newer projects. But you're correct, the older developments, they may not have EV today unless they had come to us with an administrative modification requesting to add it on their own volition through an administrative process as an accessory use. So we have seen, I know we've seen Walmart come through, we've seen Flatiron Crossing come through, more commercial properties come through to add EV, which makes sense. They want people to come, park, shop, eat, visit, play, linger, whatever. We've seen Amazon come through up north. Have we seen many residential? I can't think of many residential, but the newer projects over the last couple of years do all require EV charging. And so that is incorporated.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go to second round now. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, Mayor. You know, part of a TOD too is creating a better opportunity for us to use EVs, and not all EVs in the future might be cars necessarily. So we have to build the infrastructure in these TOD areas. And I don't want to tell families you can't take your child to such and such place for their ballet lessons. The bus doesn't go there. Now you are forced to just take the bus, or you're just forced to take the rail. So I would err on the side of the fact that we could use other mobility structures in the future that could utilize this EV. I feel like we're really biting ourselves amidst, you know, what our own perceived thoughts are, that it's always going to be cars. There's a bunch of studies that have said that it's good to have EV charging in TODs, and I can send that to council as part of the network to alleviate a lot of range anxiety and supporting environmental goals, optimizing the grid demand, and so on. So I just want to have an equity focus here and make sure that we don't want to exclude EV charging in areas that we have humans that could use them. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I have two people online, and then we'll go to you, Councilmember Cohen. Councilmember Peterson.
I just want to clarify that in mixed-use zone districts and in TODs, that EV charging ports are still welcome as accessory uses. And it's actually really convenient to have them there because there is shopping and other things happening in those areas. It would just be as a primary use, like designating land to, like you would a gas station, to have only people coming through to charge their vehicles in that space is what we would be restricting.
All right, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought I heard a question in there, but yes, that is correct, that they would still be allowed. Accessory use EV charging stations would be allowed on any zoning district.
Does that answer your question, Councilmember Peterson?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I would really implore my colleagues to think about EV charging stations as primary use as gas stations. Would we put a gas station in the middle of a TOD development? I would hope not, but based on some of the conversations that have happened tonight, I'm not sure that's the case. The whole point of TOD is to get people out of their cars, walking and biking. As Councilmember Peterson did point out, this designation does not prohibit the use of them as accessory units or as accessory to the primary use of the facility. Park and rides can still have a swath of EV charging stations. That's not an EV charging lot like a gas station. We can still put a swath of EV charging stations down in Arista, for example, right down the main drag right there. We're accommodating people that have EVs and need to charge those EVs, but we're not designated as a EV charging station like a gas station. We need to change the way we think about how we charge, where we charge, because EV cars are not the exact same thing as ICE cars, internal combustion engine cars. They just aren't. And I really implore my colleagues to start thinking about how can we change our mindset on that. Thank you.
Councilmember Cohen next.
Well, I was going to ask a question about zonings, but just to answer Councilmember Ward, I don't think the comparison to a gas station is really on par because gas stations have huge tanks of fuel buried beneath them. They have trucks that come regularly to deliver the fuel that has lots of fumes. And certainly that's why we have setbacks. No one wants to live next to a gas station. And gas stations have substantially higher traffic counts because people are coming and going at a rapid rate. Whereas at a charging station, as we know, the car's going to be there for a while. So the environmental impacts and the aesthetic impact of a charging station is very much different than a gas station in my mind. I'm still confused why we are trying to be restrictive of where charging stations go, knowing that the biggest challenge to adoption of EV cars is the availability of charging stations. And just to repeat the current point, that if you live in a TOD and you don't have a garage, we're going to stop you from maybe potentially having a charging station that you can plug in overnight like everybody else. We're going to discourage people in those communities from having an electric car. I know it's been stated we want you to use a bus or a rail, but that's not realistic for everyone. You shouldn't be required to have to use a bus or rail if you live in a TOD. In our cases, we live in a suburban community where you just cannot walk everywhere. You cannot bike everywhere safely. And it's certainly impossible to take 2 kids in car seats on a bike. So I think we need to make it as accessible and easy to put them as wherever they can be used. I did have one question related to that, is that does this exclude parks? So in other words, are we excluded from putting charging stations at an open space parking lot or a commons parking area? Because it would restrict people time people could spend at a park if they potentially had to watch the charge on their car.
This, I think, is another case where it would fall into that accessory category, as the park is the primary permitted use, and then the accessory use, however.
The same as if the HOA has a private park,
Exactly.
they could do it through that
Yep.
process. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Anderson.
Okay, thank you. And I think that clarification of what a primary permitted use was is helpful. And so this still allows for number 2, we're still allowing, it could be for on-street parking, there could still be EV charging stations. They could go into any parking lot for any store that already exists. That's true, right? It's just not like a gas station type of EV charging situation, but they could still go in all these other places.
Right, as an accessory to the primary use. So there would have to be a primary use. So if it's just an open parking lot, that would not qualify as an accessory use. So it'd then become the primary use of the lot.
Okay, I'm still fine with the no on 2. There's a point brought up on question 4 about the in the case that the city manager would want to defer that to council. I would like to explore that further on that legal question. that these could come before council on certain, at certain times. As a clarification, mostly yes, but it would be nice, if we ever see something that was just questionable. And then on number 5, I can definitely, I'm kind of going back and forth on this one. Like I understood the point to be that this, this ACE's recommendation was kind of defining the scale and if the primary use is EV charging, that you wouldn't then have these larger commercial accessories. But I would be open to a further conversation there. And when is the right time to bring forward an opportunity to have a larger commercial accessory, more like a gas station with these EV charging stations, which sounded like that was a future conversation. But I do agree that when you're charging your car and you're there for 30 minutes, that you would want a place to hang out. So I am open on that one. That to whether now is the time to determine how big that commercial accessory should be, or if that comes forward in the future. So thank you.
All right. So any other comments from my colleagues? Do you have consensus to move forward? Oh, sure. Councilmember Brown. Sorry.
One other question. It's not clear to me. I was just skimming again the bill and how we're threading the needle of compliance with it. So it talks about under the requirement to have administrative review processes, specifying that means you cannot hold a public hearing or have a decision made by an appointed public body. So I mean, I'm curious if we're kind of picking and choosing, and that by the letter of it, we feel we'll be okay.
I can, Ms. Merwin, I can jump in on this one. With all the land use bills that the state has passed over the last couple of years, this has been something, and I think Councilmember Brown, you used the right term, we're trying to thread this very carefully. Broomfield aligns with the concepts in these state laws, including with EV charging. And we have a process and we encourage that type of development. And then we see some of the requirements here and think, gosh, there should be a public process, which I think what Councilmember Twist said. So state, we appreciate this bill, but we really struggle with adopting it. So as we mentioned in the memo, our legal opinion from the city attorney's office is that this is an encroachment on local control, that zoning and land use decisions should be local, and that this is an overreach by the state. We are proposing an ordinance that complies with the tenor and the concepts in the state law, but might not comply with all of it. So arguably, yes, if we have a public review process that calls up to council, we will not be in compliance with this bill. As was brought up before, the consequences are sort of up in the air. We've seen on other land use bills that the state has tied it to money. That's currently the subject of legal challenges. There might be other avenues the state might take to try to enforce these land use bills on local jurisdictions, and that remains to be seen. But yeah, it is sort of an imposition on local control, and we're trying to do our best to help council comply, but also maintain their local control on this land use, on these land use decisions.
Well, thank you, Attorney Rogers. That definitely answers my question. I think in light of the myriad of examples that have popped up, I think I'm going to change my response for number 4 to I do think public comment would be good. This is the first time that we're going to be having an ordinance like this, and we don't know if if developers truly want to build gas station like, developments here, or if it is going to be more of the accessory. I mean, I envision these primarily being accessory uses, but perhaps they are going to want more primary use. So, yeah, thank you very much. That is all.
All right, thank you. Anyone else want to change their mind? Because this can't get any more convoluted. Well, if you need a tiebreaker for that, I agree with Councilmember Brown and Twist that we should have the public process. Okay, we got another one. We got Councilmember Henkel wants a public process. Anyone else want to allow the people to have a voice? Anderson too, thank you. Is that you too, Mackenzie and Cohen? So we believe that people should have a say.
Mayor, and I also am looking to staff right now because are we hearing that you wanted as a referred option or an automatic option?
Like a call up? What's the difference, Ms. Rogers?
Referred is the city manager looks at the city manager or her designee looks at an administrative application and recalls this discussion and say, I'm going to refer this. This one's going through the public process, or this one is only, 3 EV chargers on a small part of land. This should be administratively approved so we can get it quickly. A call up is where council's notified that an application has been submitted. Here's the administrative recommendation. You can call it up or not within the deadline. I don't know if the city
What does
manager.
Manager Hoffman think?
The default would be sending it to you all.
Mhm.
Again, so that would, yeah. The default would be sending it to you all until we can acclimate to what the state is thinking or not thinking or implementing or not implementing. Again, it's possibly another one of those ready, fire, aim. So
All right,
defaulting there.
all right. And that, we have consensus for that. You people online okay with that? Councilmember Lim?
Yes, that's fine.
Gleason, Ward, got nods,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
All right, so we have consensus for that item. Do you need any other feedback from council right now? Are you guys, Ms. Merwin or? Where are we standing right now? You have a tally?
We do.
Oh.
So for question 1. Put this. Question 1, you were all had consensus to update the municipal code to allow EV charging as a primary permitted use in commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zone districts. Question 2, we changed course, but it looks like we have,
Can we have the chart up again, please?
oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Thank you. I
Oh, no,
forgot
it's not
all
question
the
2.
dates.
Question 2 was no, it was a consensus of no. Except 3 people were open to exploring it in a TOD, but that was the minority with 3. Question 3, which is the setbacks and site distances. You were all in consensus on that. Question 4, there was quite a bit of change. It looks like we are leaning by 1 or so to go through a public process. So the answer would have been no, and incorporating a public process instead and recommending that the city manager send these applications to council for review. Number 5, we have for the ACES recommendation, it looks like primarily yes. Yeah, all yes with a few notes.
All right.
Notes, not no's, but notes, comments.
Yes, no, yes, no, yes.
So we've got great feedback tonight. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Appreciate
Chuck.
it.
We appreciate you too. Well, it is 8:33 and we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute recess. So we'll be back at 8:43. Thank you. And we're back. We're on the third item for tonight's study session, and this item is related to potential updates to the Broomfield Municipal Code related to wireless facility applications. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you. And joining us this evening for the first time, I do believe, Mr. Cameron Ennis he's our new principal planner. Welcome.
Hi, welcome.
Mayor Pro Tem, council members. Cameron Ennis, Principal Planner. I am new, so thank you for the welcome. So tonight I'm here to talk about a proposed code update regarding wireless communication facilities reviews, and this also stems from a House bill as well as FCC guidance. So we'll jump into that. So next slide, please. So just a little bit of background, give you some context about how we got here. So wireless facilities are regulated by a combination of local, state, and federal authorities. At the federal level, that is the FCC. As far as our code goes, back in September of 1996, Council approved the first regulation of mobile radio service facilities and created Chapter 1735 of our code. In December 2000, that section was amended and created an administrative review process for wireless facilities. March 2017, there was a change in state law that allowed small cell facilities to be located within public rights of way. 2018, the FCC amended and adopts its rules to implement federal shot clocks for the review of wireless facilities and permitting. So they created a 60-day shot clock applying to permitting of wireless facilities on an existing structure and a 90-day shot clock applying to permitting of a new structure. Following that in August of 2018, this was more in response to what occurred in 2017. Council approved Ordinance 2070, which amended Chapter 1735 to create a definition section, as well as adding an administrative review process and creating provisions for small cell facilities. The final item here that occurred in June of this past year was House Bill 25-1056, which was signed by Governor Polis. And we will jump into what that says right here. So what is this bill? What is its intent? What is the purpose of it? So this bill was passed to address gaps in the wireless coverage in Colorado and to address how to close those gaps, with most of the blame being placed on local permitting processes and the length of time that those are taking. So again, the intent is to speed up review timelines for wireless facility permitting and to preempt local government permit approvals if the timeline for that review is too long. It establishes its own shot clocks, so 90 days for small cell and existing structures, and 150 days to review new structures. Local municipalities are compelled to comply with these requirements, and I will say the way that they are compelled is a little bit different. There's no funding cutoff or anything like that. It is really just the preemption aspect, that if those timelines are reached and nothing has been approved, then the state says the current law as written says that those facilities are approved outright. So what does our current code look like? We have two levels of review for wireless facilities. We have administrative level review and public hearing level review. So as far as administrative level review goes, those are facilities or items that are eligible facility requests, administrative amendments, and small cell facilities. These are things like new or replacement equipment, changes to ground equipment, things like that. Actually, oh, sorry, I haven't been advancing the slide. So go back one slide, actually. There we go. So there's the examples of what would be an administrative level review. These are the vast majority of the applications that we see. And historically, those have been reviewed and approved within about 60 days, plus or minus. Next slide, please. So for public hearing level reviews, those would be things like new facilities that are not small cell towers or monopole towers that are greater than 5 feet in height above surrounding light poles. Those are two examples of public hearing reviews. LERC currently makes a recommendation for these, and these type of applications must go to council for a final decision. These type of applications are relatively rare. We've only seen 3 in the past 5 years. And those reviews have averaged about 200 days, more or less. A lot of that time, I will note, is due to the needing 2 hearings, so the LERC hearing and the council hearing, and the standard public notice requirements that go along with those. So that takes up quite a big chunk of that 200 days, more or less, that it's taking us to review those. Next slide, please. So new items that came along from this House bill. So co-location applications or existing facility requests. So these are the administrative level reviews. Those must adhere to a 90-day review period. That review period starts when the formal application is submitted. And we as the local government may pause that period if we determine that insufficient information is provided. There's also an option to make a mutual agreement with the applicant to extend that review period. So if they reach the end of that 90 days and we feel that they have not provided us the information that we need to review it and approve it, we can come to a mutual written agreement with that applicant to extend that review period. Again, if that review period expires, so that 90-day review period expires without any written agreement to extend it, the current House bill as written would say that those wireless facilities or those applications are automatically approved. Next slide, please. So for new facilities, these would be facilities that would go through a public hearing process. It's essentially the same setup. However, that review period is 150 days instead of 90. Again, there's a mutual agreement option. If they reach the end of that 150 days and it's not ready to be approved, we can enter a mutual agreement with that applicant to extend that review period. And once again, if we've reached that 150 days and there's no mutual agreement, this House bill as written would say that that application is deemed approved. Next slide, please. So here are the proposed changes just generally to our code that would bring us into compliance with this House bill. We would propose to amend section 1735 of the Broomfield Municipal Code to clearly establish a 90-day review period for co-location applications, so that's administrative level review, and a 150-day new facility review period, so that's public hearing level review. We would also propose to create a provision to allow staff a period of time at the beginning of the review process to determine if applications are sufficient. Again, that goes back to the section in the House bill that allows us to pause that review period if we determine there's not sufficient information. We would also propose to create a provision to allow applicants and Broomfield to enter into an agreement to extend the review period. We would also propose to make changes to the final approving authority for new facilities, so public hearing level reviews, to speed up the review process. That's subject to your direction. That's one of the questions that we have. And I also want to note here that we are not proposing to add any provisions in our code about automatic approval or anything like that. However, like I've mentioned, the state legislation as written would deem those applications approved if they reach that end of that review period and they did not have an approval or a mutual agreement to extend. Next slide, please. So as far as public engagement goes, very similar to the last one, we would post a Broomfield Voice page and keep it updated and also solicit feedback on that page. We'll place a notice in the community update and we'll also notice it through our standard public notice process. We're also preparing a draft ordinance to be tentatively scheduled for the first reading in April of this year. Next slide, please. So I'll leave it off with our questions. So number one here, does council wish to direct staff to move forward with the proposed code update regarding wireless communication facility timelines to substantially comply with HB 25-1056 as outlined. And if council wishes to proceed with the code update, number 2 here, recognizing that Broomfield will only have time for a single public hearing to meet the 150-day review timeline for public hearing approvals, should council or the Land Use Review Commission be the final decision-making authority for new wireless facilities requiring use by special review at a public hearing. Also a note here, if council directs staff to draft an update that authorizes LERC to make the final decision for applications that require public hearing approval, a call-up provision will not be included to ensure that we meet that 150-day timeline. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, does any member of council have any questions on this item? I do. What happens if the wireless permitter gives you an incomplete, insufficient application and doesn't agree to an extension and rides out the clock because they know they're going to get automatic approval from the state? Do we have anything to prevent that from happening and wireless facilities just popping up anywhere?
So I think there's actually 2 parts to that question. The first part, so if they were to submit an incomplete application to us, when we receive that, part of what we're proposing to change in our code would give us about 10 days, I believe. That timeline is up in the air right now, but we would have a period of time at the beginning to determine if that application is sufficient. And as the bill is currently written, we actually can pause the review period, that 90 days or 150 days, if we determine that that application that just came in is not sufficient for review. So there is a way to pause at that moment. However, as far as them waiting out the clock, I think maybe I'll defer over to.
Yes,
Ms. Rogers.
thank you for that question, Mayor. Nationwide, what we see is that cities tend to work with the wireless provider and they don't necessarily go to the extreme of starting to build when there's active movement on the application. So long as there's, and our staff does a great job with this, keeping good relationships with the applicant, with the company and whoever they're using to help build this tower. Knowing that there's a path forward, we can usually avoid a tower just being built. If it would get to that point and we thought the application was so insufficient, they didn't have the right authority, the federal law and the state law would support us, we would file legal action trying to get an injunction to stop that construction pending complete approval of the application. Application completeness is something that we've seen for years in the federal law and regulations, and we're seeing it in the state law. So I think we would be on the side of right. And knowing how much our staff does to work with the applicant to make sure they have everything they need, I don't foresee that being an issue in Broomfield.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to ask along the same lines. Your answer was about a pause. How long does the pause last?
So that's not actually detailed in the text of the bill. That's kind of up to us to determine.
Okay.
So yeah, it's kind of a non-answer, but.
Does the bill say whether these are business days or just calendar days?
Entirely sure.
The memo, I think, just said
I think
days.
I believe it's calendar days from my understanding.
If I wanted to be sneaky, I could file it right before Thanksgiving and have nothing done till January and expedite the clock. Is there any way we could add in benchmarks for progress, rather than have to file an injunction and spend all your time to stop a proposal? Is there a way to say, well, you haven't gotten to this point that you should have gotten, so we're not going to pause it, we're just going to kill it?
So we could have some kind of benchmark. I'm not entirely sure what.
Certain things have to be filed by a certain date. If you don't file this plan by day 100, then you haven't met a progress matrix that would get you within the 150 days.
We can explore that, but I don't think we can commit to that right now.
Because otherwise,
I
to the mayor's point, you could just
absolutely-
write it out if you wanted
Yeah.
to by just not filing things.
absolutely understand, and we'll make that comment, take that comment down tonight and explore what some of those options might be. But unless Attorney Rogers can help me think of some benchmarks off the top of my head, I don't want to 100% commit tonight,
Right.
but
No,
we
I'm
can
just
certainly
thinking,
explore it. Yeah.
I would like to see if maybe we could add a certain set of benchmarks. So if someone is not progressing, then my follow-up that if they aren't progressing by, say, day 100, so there's no time to do certain things, would we have the ability to cancel the application because it hasn't met the progress benchmarks and you have to start over and reapply?
One of the things we discussed last year on Prop 123 in that study session, which is the expedited process for eligible inclusionary housing projects, which will be coming back to you one day for another study session. But in that study session, we mapped out benchmarks, a very strict timeline for revise, resubmit. And so we could look at something like that to keep the project moving and incorporate time.
Because there have to be a certain amount of time for a public notice for a hearing too, right?
Correct.
So
Yep,
they
that's
may-
part of the reason we really only have time for one hearing.
Right, but if they don't submit certain things in time that won't allow us to have a hearing.
Right.
Under the law, it just goes through and gets approved.
If I
So-
could jump in for a sec, the only thing that would caution me about, especially a wireless tower application or wireless deployment application, right now we have, it's either complete or it's not complete, and we get to have that decision and we could deny if it's not complete. I just worry about making benchmarks because somebody's going to get to 90% complete, but I'm so, I just think it's adding, I mean, we can talk about it some more, but I just think it might be adding deadlines and steps that will actually hurt us in the process rather than help get the companies to complete their application sooner. I wouldn't want to codify it.
Well, like, how much, is there like a 2-week notice for a public hearing? Is that the requirement or something like that?
It's essentially 2 weeks. It's 10 days. Signs are shorter. Newspaper notices are.
But if at some point there's not time left for a public hearing, our hands are tied.
Right, unless we just,
We can't act without having we couldn't cancel without having a
you
vote.
could have the public hearing and you could deny it, I guess.
We'd have to allow the proper amount of time for a hearing.
Right,
So we couldn't deny it unless we had the public hearing, right?
correct.
So could we automatically schedule a public hearing the minute an application is filed? And that leaves us the ability to kill it if they aren't making progress.
I'm not sure if that's working in good faith on the on the
I don't know.
intent of the.
Like it.
Otherwise, we easily could be manipulated to just letting things fly through. Not that they probably would, we never know where people will propose to put these things, but. Okay, well, my suggestion is we find ways to establish in our policy benchmarks or stops or requirements that they have to give us enough time to have a public hearing or that's scheduled up front. So we have the ability to stop it before the 150 days is up. Thank you.
Solid. All right, Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. On question one, it was my understanding that if we didn't establish this proposed code, that the state would override us. Is that correct? That the 150 and 90 days would, if we didn't put our own pieces in place, that those we would be out of luck. Is that the way it's interpretation?
More or less, yes. Regardless of what we do, the state's review periods and their preemption would still exist.
Okay, so from that standpoint, I think I'm yes on one, and I hear Councilmember Cohen, and anything we can do to set a hearing regardless of their timing, that, I mean, I guess not right away, but as we're approaching that end date, we just say, this is your last possible chance. We're setting the hearing and we're going to have the hearing, even if it's incomplete or something. I agree with something in that along those lines. On the second part, I think we've had this discussion before. We're the elected body, LERC is the appointed body, and it just seems that if we can only have one or the other, that it has to be, even though it's hard to say this because we have to get them on our council calendars, it just feels like it needs to be, we need to hear these applications. So I would say council, and thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. I did have one small question about the pausing the review period, which is, can that occur indefinitely? So hypothetically, if they kept submitting an incomplete application or didn't provide us the information we needed, just kept trying to do that, can we say, nah?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe it can continue to go on. The bill does have text about when they submit back. We have another opportunity at that point to determine if it's sufficient. So the answer would be yes.
Okay, that's great. That's great to hear. So yeah, I think to the first question, yes. To the second, I mean, is there enough time for a call up, to allow for a call up or something like that, so that we have, no, that's a no.
No, unfortunately not. Yeah.
Okay, so this would have to be like a quick process of a public hearing and that sort of thing. Yeah, which I think that's fine, considering that we've only had 3 in the last 5 years. I know we're short on time, but we can shove this in somewhere in the calendar. So, yeah, apologies in advance to our mayor pro tem and county manager for saying you gotta find some time in the calendar, but I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Folks online, I can't see hands. Anybody want to weigh in else? Mayor Pro Tem Lim, then Councilmember Ward.
Yes to number 1, and 2 is council. I do have a request. I looked up our position on this bill last year, and we did take an opposed position to this officially as Broomfield, and I did look up at the vote, and our representative even voted no on this bill against the tide last year. So my request is, if we get something like this before us, if council took a position on the bill that we're looking at that looks somewhat like preemption, if it quacks like a duck, and then could the staff note it in the memo? You know, like say, we took an opposed to HB 25-1056, but it passed anyway. That's just an extra request, side request. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I agree. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes to number 1, to number 2, council.
All right, cool. Councilmember Twist.
Thank you, Mayor. Same. Yes, and council. Thank you.
Councilmember McKenzie.
Thank you, Mayor. Same.
Thank you. Yes, and council. Councilmember Brown. Oh, I'm so sorry. Councilmember Peterson, I didn't see you. You go ahead.
No worries. Thank you. Number 1, yes. Number 2, I have a question. Would it be possible to get a like a recommendation from the Land Use Revision Review Commission in preparation for council making a decision? I realize we only have time for 1 hearing, but could we get their input?
I believe the answer would still be no, because it would still have to be scheduled and noticed in the same way that it currently is, which would extend that period beyond the 150 days.
It doesn't require a hearing, Councilmember Peterson, but LERC would still need to meet formally as a body. And that scheduling would just add time that we don't have.
That's
What
unfortunate.
could be done though is similar to concept reviews, where there's a time in the script for a member of LERC to make a comment on the application, if they're in attendance.
I would like that to be an option. Otherwise, it should fall to council. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you. I am a yes and council. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess we have to, number one. And number two, council, yes, but like an automatic meeting. I would just want to trigger that. And then if we don't need it, we don't need it. Thanks.
All right. I think you have the consensus to move forward with number one, and number two will be council's review.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And the final item of business for council's consideration this evening is Councilmember Ward's request for future action regarding Title 17 administrative land use approvals impacting outdoor recreation facilities. So this won't be a discussion on the topic for those of you who are new, but instead an opportunity to provide, council can provide staff direction on whether or not we want to direct staff to dedicate time and resources to this request, hence a study session to discuss it. So Councilmember Ward, you may now begin your 5-minute presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. This should go by relatively quickly. Prior to this meeting, I sent all of you on council draft language to modify Title 17 of the Broomfield Municipal Code related to administrative approvals. Just a little bit of a backstory. The reason for this is actually my apartment complex, Camden Flatirons, had submitted an application with city and county staff to add on some for rent townhome units, as is permitted under their existing PUD. Because of the location, there is a dog park. That I forget the exact size of the dog park, but it's a pretty substantial dog park for an apartment complex. The site of the dog park is going to be used for the construction of those townhomes. And so the dog park is going to be moved, but the size of that dog park is going to be substantially reduced. And but the way that our current code is worded, it fell under administrative approval process. So residents have complained that there was no kind of official process for them to voice their concerns other than the not public hearing, but the neighborhood meeting that staff did require Camden Flatirons to host. And so this modification is really just to ensure that if there are changes to outdoor recreation facilities or dog parks, for example, playgrounds, etc., that changes to those facilities can't be made through administrative review. They must go through a public review process. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
A very great and concise recap. So we'll go to council members. Trying not to get into a big debate, but we want to kind of give direction. I will add, if I may, that I was contacted by impacted residents, not Austin, at the Camden apartments. And so I went to see what they were talking about. And it is a substantial change that they were able to game the system, if you will, because of the undeveloped land they had. What they were considering 10% was really a sizable amenity that many of the residents have enjoyed, and they're marketing it, right, as part of the amenity. So I agree with this move. And so I guess we'll hear from everybody else. If y'all have any thoughts, you can do a thumbs up if you think we should move forward, keep it brief. Did you have anything you wanted to say, Mayor Pro Tem Lim?
No, I was just signaling my thumbs up there.
Okay. What about you, Councilmember Peterson?
Councilmember Ward, doesn't your amendment also, or adjustment, also say that anything that gets moved needs to be essentially the same size? It can't be reduced?
Correct. Yeah, this would not necessarily prohibit the townhomes in this particular case with Camden being constructed. It just requires that if they're going to use the property where the amenity is, it has to be the exact same size moved somewhere else on the property.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification.
Councilmember Peterson, this is Nancy. If I could jump in real quick, and this is just to maintain an administrative review. Let's say you had a developer that did want to change the size of amenity, they could still do that. They would just need to go through the formal process. So if Camden, if they wanted to do this now, their dog park would have had to been the same size to stay in administrative review, if that makes sense. So it doesn't close the door for the developer or the project owner. It just is, it's all about the administrative review.
Well, to clarify though, since this was, it isn't apples to apples. The residents felt like they didn't have a voice, like all the bare minimum that Camden needed to do was have a check the box neighborhood meeting. Where they didn't really have to care because they were getting it anyway, right? So I think the larger issue for me is that if it is a major change to what folks were promised, it should have to go through a public
Then it gets
process.
a public hearing, yeah.
Because this is proof positive why administrative review is bad. If there's a loophole to exploit, they're gonna find it. And that's why we need to maintain this public process, because I've been doing this 8 years and I've become cynical for a reason. It didn't just happen overnight. So this just proves my point that administrative reviews don't always serve the public interest. Councilmember Cohen.
Just for clarity, the townhomes were approved separately? Or were they part of the original project?
So Councilmember Cohen, the original PUD for Camden Flatirons outlined a specific number of units that they were permitted or entitled to develop. When they developed to that entire or to that max limit, so they still had extra units they could build. And so this administrative review process that they used was to add on units that they were entitled to but had not necessarily kind of built or put in the original site development plan.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
All right, any other questions? Are we good to move forward with this amendment? Yes? Yes online, y'all good?
I'm just happy we're starting to
All right.
go towards public comment.
Well,
Thanks.
thank you. Thank you, Austin, for bringing this forward. Our Councilmember Ward. Appreciate it. And so that concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. Is there any other business to come before the council from my colleagues or staff? There being no